Hey everyone, per your requests, I'm starting Sword of Coming, chapters 461 through 470 of the previous episode. Jian Lai arrives in the capital, befriending a local orphan named Jian Lai and sharing hard-won wisdom. His quiet study is interrupted by the enigmatic cultivator Lu Tai, who trails him through the city's hidden dangers. Uncovering a demonic plot at the Flying Eagle Fortress, Jian uses his refined fist and sword skills to defeat the villains. After settling affairs and parting with Lu Tai, Jian treks towards Stalactite Mountain. His journey shapes his character, teaching him that true strength requires preserving one's humanity in a cruel world. If you're able to, please support me on PayPal to help me stay active. Thank you. Now let's get back to the story of Sword of Coming audio series. Jian Lai shut his book and took out a picture scroll. He had already fed 9 grain rain coins to this picture scroll. Yet the founding emperor of Southern Garden Nation was still yet to come to life. This caused Jian Lai to feel somewhat exasperated. Jian Lai unfurled the picture scroll and held a single grain rain coin in his hand. This would be the final grain rain coin. He would have no choice but to give up if this still failed to bring the person in the picture scroll to life. Jian Lai's wealth hadn't fallen from the sky, so he naturally wouldn't waste his grain rain coins to fill a bottomless pit. When Jian Lai tossed the final grain rain coin into the picture scroll, there was the same reaction as always. The grain rain coin vanished into thin air. Clouds and mists drifted across the picture scroll as usual, and that was it. Pei Qian had already put her damaged and bent book on the table, and walked over to stand beside Jian Lai. Jian Lai hadn't tried to purposely conceal this matter, so Pei Qian had already seen this picture scroll eating grain rain coins a few times before. Seeing Jian Lai's disappointed expression once again, she giggled and asked, "Will it be better if I change my surname to Zheng? Pei Qian lose money, Zheng Qian make money." 1. Jian Lai sighed and was just about to put the picture scroll away. Turning around and looking back, he saw a white cat standing beside the window, which he had opened to get some fresh air. The white cat didn't look at Jian Lai, and it instead looked at Pei Qian and jeered, "Go and eat shit, little girl." Pei Qian was completely stumped, while Jian Lai didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. This white cat was truly a being that bore strong grudges. In fact, this was identical to Pei Qian. However, Jian Lai's heart suddenly jolted at this moment, and he immediately stood up and dragged Pei Qian behind him. A young Taoist priest carrying a huge golden gourd diagonally across his back was sitting on the windowsill and looking at Jian Lai with a wide smile. The white cat jumped onto his shoulder before sitting down and curling up. Back in the capital of Southern Garden Nation, Jian Lai had caught a glance of this young Taoist priest from very far in the distance. Afterward, he had roughly learned of this young Taoist priest's identity during a conversation with Zhong Qiu. He referred to the old Taoist priest as my master, and he was the person responsible for beating the drum and allowing people to ascend from the lotus flower-blessed land. The young Taoist priest stole a glance at the sword-nurturing gourd on Jian Lai's hip before sneering. "Its quality is only so. It's not really a top-notch sword-nurturing gourd. It's far, far inferior to my sword-nurturing gourd. Is something the matter?" Jian Lai asked expressionlessly. The young Taoist priest sidestepped the question and he instead asked, "Aren't there 2 of the highest quality sword-nurturing gourds in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent? How come you didn't manage to obtain them?" He was referring to the golden-purple gourd that celestial maiden Su Jia had once owned before becoming a shell of her former self. He was also referring to the silver-white gourd once owned by Wind Snow Temple's sword immortal Wei Jin. Aoyang had obtained the sword-nurturing gourd and gifted it to Li Baoping. The young Taoist priest propped his arms on the windowsill and swung his legs back and forth, explaining, "There are 7 sword-nurturing gourds in the world that came from a single gourd vine personally planted and cultivated by the Tao ancestor. These are the most precious sword-nurturing gourds, and one can nurture the most flying swords, one can nurture flying swords the quickest, one can nurture the most indestructible flying swords, one can nurture the sharpest flying swords, one can nurture flying swords that are the best at tempering their master's physique, and one can nurture the smallest flying swords that can genuinely kill people in an undetectable manner. As for the last of these 7 sword-nurturing gourds, it's none other than the one that I'm carrying on my back right now. Do you know what's so mysterious about it?" Jian Lai didn't reply. Hiding behind Jian Lai, Pei Qian didn't dare to poke her head out even though she was extremely curious. The young Taoist priest lost interest when he saw Qian Ping'an playing deaf and mute, so he nimbly jumped down from the windowsill with the cat still on his shoulder. He walked over to the table and pointed at the rolled-up picture scroll, saying, "My master wants me to deliver a message to you. He feels a little bad about picking the 5 people for you and shooing you away so quickly, so he's chosen to make an exception for you and asked me to tell you some things. Firstly, you should take care of that oil paper umbrella and make sure not to randomly throw it away. The umbrella can help conceal your aura. Secondly, I'll give you one hint regarding the first picture scroll that you've chosen. However, this is the only hint that you'll get. I'll tell you the number of grain rain coins that you need to feed it. For example, this picture scroll with Wei Xian requires." The young Taoist priest smiled and raised both hands. The white cat on his shoulder lazily raised one paw, after which the young Taoist priest smiled and continued, 11 grain rain coins. After saying this, the young Taoist priest couldn't help but feel a sense of disappointment. At the same time, he also felt a sense of delight at Qian Ping'an's misfortune. It was the old Taoist priest who had determined the total number of grain rain coins required for the 4 picture scrolls. However, it was he who had decided how many grain rain coins each specific picture scroll required. Of course, Qian Ping'an was completely unaware of these internal machinations. The young Taoist priest had initially thought that Qian Ping'an would definitely pick martial arts maniac Julian first, so he had left a huge surprise in place that would have certainly caused Qian Ping'an much angst and grief. Unexpectedly, however, the little lotus spirit had interfered in his plans and helped Qian Ping'an pick Wei Xian first. "Then why are you only telling me this now?" Qian Ping'an asked. The young Taoist priest chuckled and replied, "I won't have broken the rules as long as I tell you the answer before you feed the final grain rain coin to that picture scroll. My master won't scold me either." Qian Ping'an didn't flare up in rage, and the young Taoist priest felt even more bored and uninterested. He waved a hand and said, "That's all there is. Let's hope we won't have the opportunity to meet again in the future. Just looking at you makes me feel annoyed." Qian Ping'an was unfazed and he asked, "Are there any immortal ferry stations that will allow me to travel to Eastern Treasured Vile Continent?" The young Taoist priest was extremely unwilling to answer Qian Ping'an's question, yet he had no option but to do so upon recalling his master's temper. He didn't dare to disobey his master. The young Taoist priest humped coldly when he saw that small head sticking out from behind Qian Ping'an's back, and was seemingly very dissatisfied and unwilling to give Pei Qian so much as another glance. With a backward leap, he jumped out of the window with the white cat on his shoulder, vanishing without a trace. Qian Ping'an unfurled the picture scroll again, feeding it the 11th grain rain coin. He didn't hesitate at all. Mist suffused into the surroundings and eventually enveloped the entire room. Qian Ping'an tugged Pei Qian back with him, retreating 5 or 6 paces from the table. 1st and 15th were primed and ready to burst out from his sword-nurturing gourd at any moment. A short man wearing a dragon robe rose from the picture scroll and stood on the table. He then stepped onto the chair before stepping down to the floor. Looking at Qian Ping'an, the founding emperor of Southern Garden Nation said with a stern expression, "Wei Xian pays his respects to master. Feel free to command me against enemies in the future." Qian Ping'an nodded in acknowledgement. Afterward, the two of them looked at each other in silence, causing the atmosphere to become heavy and slightly awkward. "Such a powerful and domineering aura," Wei Xian suddenly remarked. Qian Ping'an didn't know how to respond. Meanwhile, Pei Qian felt as if she had learned something new. Good heavens, this person was far too shameless, was he not? Wei Xian looked around and asked slowly, "Master, do you have an outfit that isn't so eye-catching? I want to get changed and wander around outside tonight. I want to appreciate the impressive mountains and rivers of majestic world. I'll naturally return when master plans to set off again." Qian Ping'an retrieved a brand new outfit and handed it to Wei Xian. After Wei Xian changed out of his dragon robe and put on the ordinary-looking clothes from Qian Ping'an, he rested a single hand on the windowsill before leaping out and landing on top of the wall. He then bounded away and vanished into the darkness of night. "It's so late at night, so what mountains and rivers are there to appreciate?" Pei Qian asked. "How would I know what he's thinking?" Qian Ping'an replied in helplessness. An uneventful night passed by. Pei Qian returned to her room, and she gritted her teeth in seething anger when she saw the pile of shit on the table. They set off the next day, and sure enough, Wei Xian met up with Chen Ping'an in front of the inn. Afterward, Wei Xian didn't say anything else. Wei Xian was even shorter than Chen Ping'an, and this made it very difficult to believe that he was the founding emperor of Southern Garden Nation. Not only that, but he had also been the strongest superior grandmaster during his time. His martial arts prowess was outstanding, and the following generations referred to him as someone powerful enough to face an entire army of tens of thousands by himself. As time went on, Pei Qian gradually grew accustomed to Wei Xian's presence in their group. This was because she could treat him like thin air. The end of winter was near, and the three of them approached a small town located on the border of the nation. If they traveled further north, they would arrive in the Great Quan Empire, a relatively powerful empire in Parasol Leaf Continent. The immortal ferry station that the young Taoist priest had mentioned was located in the northernmost regions of this Great Quan Empire. Before seeing the small town, Pei Qian begged Chen Ping'an about something as they walked along the border of the nation. "Can you give me another talisman? The one that glows with golden light?" It was able to block that giant azure buffalo. However, Chen Ping'an remained silent as he mulled over something else. Pei Qian was unwilling to give up and she nagged. "I'm not asking you to necessarily give it to me. However, I can walk faster if I stick the talisman on my forehead. Please, I'm begging you. Aren't we in a hurry to arrive at our destination? Don't you want me to walk quicker so you can arrive at the Great Li Empire's Dragon Spring Prefecture, or whatnot sooner?" There was a loud slap. Sure enough, the talisman was slapped onto Pei Qian's forehead. It was slightly crooked, and it coincidentally didn't obstruct her vision. A wide smile immediately bloomed on Pei Qian's face. Sure enough, her footsteps also became light and swift like the wind. There was a large residence in the capital of Southern Garden Nation stuck on her forehead, so how could she still feel tired? Walking around with this talisman on her forehead was like taking a leisurely stroll in the large courtyard of her own residence. Wei Xian took a glance at Pei Qian as he walked behind her and Chen Ping'an. Right now, he was most likely feeling the same emotions as that white cat from back then. He felt like there was something wrong with this little girl's brain. The sword-deep infatuation and the saber-halting snow were hanging by Chen Ping'an's hips, and he grabbed the sword-nurturing gourd from his waist and took a swig of wine. Walking behind them, Wei Xian's footsteps had appeared slightly heavy in the beginning. Now, however, they were very light and relaxed. Pei Qian didn't notice anything, yet Chen Ping'an was naturally well aware of this. When the three of them arrived on the top of a hill, they discovered that there was swirling dust and debris not far away from here. 100 or so soldiers on horseback were fighting as they retreated, and several dozen corpses were strewn across the ground. It looked like these soldiers were risking their lives and fighting tooth and nail to protect an old man. However, Chen Ping'an was more focused on the two cultivators chasing the small army of cavalrymen, especially the sword cultivator among them. In contrast, Wei Xian was more focused on the army of mounted troops. There was a hint of approval and appreciation in his eyes as he murmured, "Soldiers hardened by 100 battles, elite infantry on foot, and formidable cavalrymen on horseback. This is most likely the Yao clan's border army belonging to the Great Quan Empire." Pei Qian was no longer afraid of this short man, so she asked in puzzlement, "How do you know all these things? Do you always wander around just to gather this kind of information?" A fervent look appeared in Wei Xian's eyes, and he paid no heed to Pei Qian's question. Southern Garden Nation had once been renowned throughout the world for its powerful army of mounted troops. In fact, these mounted troops had forced the horse soldiers of the grasslands to retreat and leave the cities. In the end, the rulers of the grasslands had almost surrendered to Southern Garden Nation. Wei Xian deserved all of the credit for this feat. Chen Ping'an suddenly turned around and asked in a solemn voice, "The Yao clan's border army? Are you sure?" There was a stern expression on Wei Xian's face as he remained completely silent, showing no signs of wanting to answer this question. Answering this question would be a complete waste of his breath. The hill shuddered as Chen Ping'an immediately shot up before plummeting down between the cavalrymen and the two cultivators. He made a promise to Mr. Qi. More precisely, he made a promise to that sole locust leaf that had been willing to flutter down and land in his palm. Thus, Chen Ping'an stopped upon encountering the Yao clan today. There were still two sides facing off against each other, yet one side was now Chen Ping'an instead of the mounted troops of the Yao clan. The sword cultivator quietly said, There's no hurry. Hearing this, his subordinate calmed down and dragged his feet along the muddy ground in boredom. The middle-aged sword cultivator was dressed in coarse white clothes, and such was the power gap between him and the Yao clan's mounted troops that there wasn't a single drop of blood on his clothes. He was fairly handsome, yet his narrow eyes and thin lips made him radiate with an aura of slight harshness. He didn't have an ordinary sword, just a flying sword that was the same length as most ordinary swords. When this flying sword left his acupoint to kill enemies, it appeared like a coiling fire dragon that couldn't be stopped. Indeed, the sabers and spears of the Yao clan's mounted troops were completely unable to stop this flying sword, immediately shattering into pieces once they came into contact with it. The sword cultivator's subordinate was a hulking pure martial artist dressed in a suit of divine dew-bearing armor. Those in the mountains commonly referred to this type of armor as simply dew armor. Qian Ping'an was no stranger to militarian armor pellets, having once obtained an armor pellet from that imperial preceptor of ancient Elm Nation. Afterward, he had purchased an extremely high-grade yet damaged dew armor from Stalactite Mountain, which Lu Tai had helped him repair later on. However, he never had the opportunity to wear it, as his Dao robe, golden sweet wine, was even more precious than the high-grade dew armor. The two cultivators skillfully cooperated with each other, with the pure martial artist guarding the sword cultivator, while the latter controlled his flying sword to slay enemies. This prevented the sword cultivator from being attacked by cavalrymen, who had slipped through the cracks and managed to charge over. At the same time, the pure martial artist could also block the arrows and crossbolts that were being fired at them. Vagrant cultivators in the mountains and marshes were most fond of seeking riches from dangerous situations. If they encountered fated opportunities, they would immediately develop the dare to charge over and take risks. Thus, one was guaranteed to see vagrant cultivators rushing over in hordes if the thatched cottage of some ancient spiritual master was uncovered, if some mystical realm formed from the shattered remains of a blessed land was discovered, and so on. These vagrant cultivators would then smash each other's brains out as they fought for those valuable spirit tools and immortal tools. Yet what was the purpose of all this? Indeed, this was simply to experience the thrill and pleasure of suppressing others and crushing them underfoot. After obtaining these powerful artifacts, one could either use them to wantonly kill others, or use them to become near invincible to all kinds of attacks. They could instill a sense of utter despair in their opponents. The sword cultivator casually strolled around the battlefield as his flying sword sliced through the air within a radius of 300 meters, leaving brilliant rays of sword light in its wake and causing flashes of bright red to spray across the sky and paint especially sanguinary afterimages. The pure martial artist followed the middle-aged sword cultivator like a shadow, tightly guarding him from all sides. The middle-aged sword cultivator was just like his flying sword, appearing extremely crisp and clean as he moved. He didn't waste his energy on any unnecessary movement. However, the hulking martial artist was the exact opposite. He was a cruel and violent person to begin with, yet he was unable to let loose and charge after those mounted troops at this moment. He felt truly stifled, unable to fight to his heart's content. Thus, each time he came across a severely wounded soldier who had fallen from their horse, he would ruthlessly crush their head under his foot regardless of whether they were dead or alive. Sometimes, he would also stomp on their chest and cause their mangled flesh and bones to blend together with their shattered armor. It was a harrowing sight. Now, however, a person had suddenly fallen from the sky. The middle-aged sword cultivator glanced at the person blocking their path as he came to a halt. He smiled and asked in the official dialect of the continent, "Are you the new guest elder of the Great Quan Empire's Lu clan?" Parasol Leaf Continent had many mountains and rivers separating the different regions from one another, so according to the immortal book in Qian Ping'an's possession, there existed far more dialects in this continent than Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. As a result, it was often the case that people in different regions spoke different dialects and adhered to different customs. Because of this, the upper echelons of the empires and nations in this continent would typically be fluent in the official dialect of the continent. This was especially the case for officials from the Ministry of Rights. "Why speak nonsense with him?" the hulking martial artist huffed in annoyance. "Just cut him down and be done with it. He's nothing more than a martial artist under the 7th tier. And killing young martial arts prodigies is even more thrilling and satisfying. To have another big fish appear out of nowhere." Does this not align with my wishes? The sword cultivator replied with a smile. Even though the sword cultivator stopped to interact with Chen Ping'an, his deadly flying sword was still hovering over the fleeing cavalrymen from the Yao clan. Apart from the very beginning, when he had joined forces with the pure martial artist to kill that cultivator accompanying the Yao clan's mounted troops, an extremely dangerous battle, the sword cultivator had simply controlled his flying sword to pick off the outer ring of cavalrymen first, especially those who tried to break free and flee. These were the rules of his game. The old man being protected by the cavalryman was wearing the same armor as everyone else. This was most likely the standard light armor for the Great Quan Empire's border army. He was clutching his abdomen at this moment, and blood continued to seep out from between his fingers. Even though his condition was miserable, the old man's expression remained calm and relaxed the entire time. He didn't appear defeated or afraid at all. Many of his elite soldiers had already died or suffered severe wounds while trying to protect him, and the deceased young men would no longer have the chance to return home in glory. In fact, they hadn't even died a gallant and heroic death while battling against an enemy nation on the border. Rather, they had fallen victim to this filthy and repulsive battle between political opponents. There was guilt and grief in the depths of the old man's eyes, yet he didn't allow these emotions to creep onto his face. Having fought on horseback for dozens of years, he was already no stranger to death and tragic partings. In any case, those who were compassionate couldn't command an army. When as such, this old general who wielded paramount power on the southern border of the nation was surprisingly calm and composed at this moment. The surviving 100 or so cavalrymen continued to guard the old general with their lives. They didn't back down in fear just because the two assassins were overwhelmingly powerful. The Yao clan was incredibly strict and disciplined when it came to training troops. For example, descendants in the Yao clan were expected to be skilled in riding and archery in their youth, regardless of whether they were legitimate descendants or illegitimate ones. After turning 15, they were then required to join the army and start from the lowest rank of scout soldier. Because of these clan rules, countless young men from the Yao clan had already died on the border of the nation. In fact, the situation was so severe that the Yao clan was renowned throughout several nations for its number of widows. Chen Ping'an didn't turn around to look at the mounted troops, and he instead asked the old general a very strange question. "General, is your surname Yao? Are your ancestors related to the Yao clan that's located in Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's Greatly Empire?" The old man furrowed his brows and replied, "The Greatly Empire? I've never heard of it before." He then hesitated for a moment before continuing. However, the ancestors of the Great Quan Empire's Yao clan did indeed come from Eastern Treasured Vile Continent. As for where exactly they came from, our ancestors were very reluctant to reveal that. When instructing someone to record the clan genealogy back then, they simply mentioned the fact that they had come from some dragon kiln. They also told us a bit about the culture and customs of their hometown. However, they explicitly prohibited us from going to Eastern Treasured Vile Continent to search for our roots. General, did your ancestors ever mention the name of any alley or a towering willow tree that was lush with leaves? Chen Ping'an asked. Even though the old man wanted to nod very badly, as this would perhaps allow him to get closer to this strange person and thus gain a sliver of a chance to stay alive, his honest and upright nature was such that he couldn't engage in dishonest acts. Moreover, this pertained to his ancestry, so how could he, a descendant, carelessly lie about it? The old man's voice was solemn as he replied, "They never mentioned any alley, nor did they mention any willow tree. They simply stated that the locust tree in their hometown was quite fragrant. This was a locust tree that had been nurtured for generation after generation. In fact, the Great Quan Empire's Yao clan also has a 1,000-year-old locust tree in the courtyard of our ancestral residence." Only after hearing this did Chen Ping'an turn around to look at the old man, nodding and saying with a smile, "I understand." The old man grew increasingly puzzled. What had this young boy understood? The sword cultivator appeared to be waiting for an outcome as well, with his eyes darting around the entire time. Seemingly receiving the outcome that he desired, he asked in an amused voice, "Have the two of you finished your small talk yet? If you're finished, then let's get to the proper matters now." Chen Ping'an rested his hands on the hilt of deep infatuation and halting snow as he asked, "Has someone paid you to perform this assassination? Are the two of you receiving money to eliminate dangers for your client?" You speak so much nonsense. The middle-aged sword cultivator remarked with an exasperated expression. This isn't usual for me, so it's quite the coincidence that you're witnessing it, Chen Ping'an said with a smile. Mingling among the mounted troops of the Yao clan, there was a young cavalryman whose appearance was slightly similar to that of the old man. He glanced at the viciously cruel sword cultivator who had cut them down as if he were cutting wheat, and glanced at the young boy dressed in white robes who had nothing but pure wind in his sleeves. The young cavalryman was at a complete loss and had no clue what was going on. A young and courageous general 2 generations younger than the old general finally found the opportunity to catch his breath and say a few words. He had only been able to flee just then, and he had been completely helpless as his brothers in arms had been killed by that flying sword one after another. He was extremely disheveled, and there was a deep and bloody gash on his face. The young man only in his 20s was in an extremely pitiful state, yet he paid absolutely no heed to this as he said in a quiet voice, "General, judging by how powerful the mystical abilities of that sinister person's flying sword are, we shouldn't have released the signal to seek reinforcements from Third Grandpa and Zhonyang." The old man was staring at Chen Ping'an the entire time, and upon hearing his trusted subordinate's statement, he chuckled coldly and replied, "We're a target, but we're also the bait." The young general was clearly a direct descendant of the Yao clan who knew many inside secrets of the border army and the imperial court, so he asked in a careful voice, "Then the imperial court's act of secretly mobilizing more than half of the cultivators from our army and redeploying them to the battle between Commandery Governor Jin Huang and Pine Needle Lake's water god?" The old general sighed with emotion and replied in a low voice, "This can be viewed as an open scheme employed by those people in the background. While causing the enemy nation in the south to lose some strength and vitality through an internal conflict, it could also serve to lead us into this trap. This definitely isn't a scheme that the Fanlu Ma clan could come up with." Chen Ping'an turned around and asked, "Dare I ask, old general, why are you being pursued by these 2 people? Perhaps due to some grudges from the battlefield?" The old man replied with a smile. This assassination plot pertained to some dirty secrets of the Great Quan Empire's imperial court, so the old man was naturally unwilling to reveal too much to Chen Ping'an. For generation after generation, the Yao clan's border army had always been loyal to the imperial Lu clan and distanced themselves from any conflicts in the imperial court. They would serve whoever became emperor, and would refuse to involve themselves in any internal power struggles. In the past 10 years, however, an unfortunate incident had taken place. According to the rules of the Yao clan, females in the clan were prohibited from marrying into wealthy clans from outside the region. They were only allowed to marry into local clans. However, the old man's young daughter had fallen in love with a traveling youth back then, and the young man had also possessed impressive character and knowledge. Not only that, but the 2 of them had also fought side by side and gone through thick and thin together. This should have led to a happy marriage and caused them to become the envy of everyone. Yet the old man had adhered to the clan rules and disapproved of this relationship. His daughter was indeed a loyal member of the Yao clan, and she had silently endured the pain of being separated from her lover. She had written him a letter to sever their relationship once and for all. Unexpectedly, however, that young man from a top-notch clan in the Great Quan Empire, the eldest son of the Ministry of Personnel's head minister, had traveled to the border again, braving the heavy snow and kneeling outside the ancestral hall of the Yao clan for an entire day and night. Everyone in the Yao clan had been moved by his sincerity. In the end, with no further reason to break the 2 lovers apart, the old man had eventually agreed to a wedding between his daughter and the young man. However, not a single member of the Yao clan from the old man's generation had traveled to the capital to attend the wedding. Afterward, his daughter had never returned home to visit either. Moreover, not a single letter was sent between the old man and his daughter's father-in-law, that lofty and influential head minister who controlled the promotion and demotion of officials. Even though the Yao clan had already been so cold and unreasonable, they had still been unable to erase the fact that the woman's surname was Yao. They had only broken the clan rule a single time. Yet 10 years later, they were now facing an immense hidden danger that threatened to destroy the entire Yao clan. The first signs of trouble had appeared last year, when the Fanlu Ma clan, the archenemy of the Ministry of Personnel's head minister, had secretly instructed the imperial censor to impeach the head minister. The infuriated emperor severely reprimanded the head minister, terrifying him so much that he had immediately written a resignation letter upon returning home. His choice of words had painted a tragic picture, reading, "My body frail and age-old, I'm inferior to even a little child in my current state. I have but 2 or 3 teeth remaining, and I grow further from the notion of fresh and immortal every day." The head minister thus asked to resign. However, the emperor had denied his resignation, and in the end, the head minister's reputation had plummeted to a shocking low. This deep-rooted battle between political opponents was only one aspect of things, and the truly troublesome aspect was the involvement of the Great Quan Empire's princes. Many outsiders who didn't follow the rules had arrived in the capital, and they had even been granted important positions in the imperial court, allowing them to add fuel to the fire. What was interesting was that all 3 princes of the empire were extremely outstanding individuals, with each skilled in their own area. In fact, each of them would have been impressive enough to be granted the title of crown prince in any of the previous generations of the Great Quan Empire. Officials in the capital rose and fell, while generals in the border cities marched east and west. There was a dizzying amount of things going on in the imperial court. The situation was so severe that even the Yao clan's border army was unable to remove themselves from these power struggles between officials. This was a clear reflection of just how dangerous the undercurrents swirling through the imperial court of the Great Quan Empire were. 1. This is a Chinese proverb implying that those who are too compassionate might not be effective in situations that require strong leadership and decisive action. An instant was all a sword cultivator needed to kill their enemy. The bonded flying sword hovering near the outer ring of the mounted troops suddenly soared past the cavalrymen. Fortunately, the sword cultivator was seeking extreme speed rather than destructive power, so he chose the shortest path that didn't have any obstacles in the way. Otherwise, his flying sword might have ruthlessly pierced through several more heads. Qian Pingyan pushed his sword out of its scabbard, holding 2 fingers together and forming a sword seal as he controlled Deep Infatuation, the immortal sword that had exhausted Do Ziji's wealth. Deep Infatuation flew back and blocked the flying sword, viciously piercing over from behind him. The middle-aged sword cultivator's heart sank. Not only was this young uninvited guest a sword expert, but he was even able to block his bonded flying sword, Candlelight? Perhaps this sword was a concealed immortal treasure? Otherwise, with Candlelight's sharpness and power, so-called divine weapons in the cultivation world would be completely unable to withstand a single strike from it. Yet, the young boy's sword wasn't damaged at all. There wasn't a single chip on it. The hulking martial artist felt slightly amused at the sword cultivator's misfortune, and he gloated, "Are you still not in a hurry?" The middle-aged sword cultivator wasn't angered, and he smiled faintly as he replied, "I'll gauge this person's strength and play along with him for a while. I have the ability to protect myself." The hulking pure martial artist dressed in Do armor smiled wickedly as he stomped a crater into the ground and charged forward in an explosive manner, throwing a punch at the young boy when he arrived 15 or so meters away. His fist aura was ferocious, and the surging astral energy was as thick as a large bowl. Qian Pingyan stood with one arm behind his back, with his hand hidden inside his sleeve. While he controlled Deep Infatuation to block the sword cultivator's flying sword again and again, he also raised his other hand to block the hulking martial artist's fist aura with his palm. The hulking martial artist's fist aura was surprisingly crushed by Qian Pingyan. The man laughed loudly, not appearing worried in the least. This was a probing attack to begin with, and he hadn't even used half of his power. "Not bad, young mister. Your Dao foundation is quite decent." "As for how decent?" He let out a soft grunt as he suddenly increased his speed and charged forward again, arriving just a few paces away from Qian Pingyan in the blink of an eye. He raised his right arm and threw a lightning-quick punch, one that was so rapid that his entire right shoulder glowed with a snow-white radiance. There was a loud thud. Just like before, Qian Pingyan used his palm to block the hulking martial artist's powerful punch. A hint of puzzlement appeared in the assassin's eyes. The young boy in front of him was as stable and unmoving as a mountain. Even though the man was confused, this didn't stop him from raising a leg and viciously kneeing Qian Pingyan. When it came to battles between martial artists, especially elite martial artists, one not only needed to think quickly, but also to attack and defend according to one's instincts. In fact, it was best if one's instincts were quicker than one's thoughts. Only then could one be considered a genuinely skilled martial artist. The hand held behind Qian Ping'an's back finally reached forward and extended out of its sleeve, gently tapping the hulking martial artist's knee. This caused the hulking martial artist to lean forward, after which Qian Ping'an smashed his elbow into his opponent's chest. The hulking martial artist dressed in Du armor was sent stumbling back. However, his fist was still being held by Qian Ping'an, so he was immediately dragged forward again, allowing Qian Ping'an to unleash a punch and hammer his Du armor. There was a loud boom as the hulking martial artist was sent flying backward, crashing into the ground more than 30 meters away. However, he only suffered very minor injuries thanks to the armor pellet he was wearing. Even so, the chi inside him was slightly shaken, and a trickle of blood seeped from the corner of his mouth. The man slapped the ground and jumped back to his feet, spitting out the saliva and blood in his mouth before grinning and grumbling. "Good heavens! Are you a sword expert? Or are you an external martial artist with a powerful physique?" Standing behind him, the middle-aged sword cultivator had an amused smile on his face as he replied, "You say martial arts prodigies are not allowed to have both skills at once?" The hulking martial artist took a deep breath before turning around to glance at Wei Xian standing on top of the hill. He no longer felt relaxed like before, and remarked to the sword cultivator, "This young boy truly deserves to die. Master, have you had enough fun yet? We definitely need to be careful so we don't end up meeting an unexpected death in a place. After all, this young boy didn't come here by himself." The sword cultivator nodded and replied, "Perhaps this is the last sliver of friendship left between the Great Quan Empire's Imperial Lu clan and Old Man Yao. Since that's the case, we can start reeling in the net now." With that, he let out an extremely high-pitched whistle. A moment later, he sprinted to one side and gestured with his hand, causing his bonded flying sword to disengage the young sword expert. His bonded flying sword transformed from physical to illusory and intangible, disappearing in a flash as it fused into his chest and returned to an acupoint where it was nurtured. Upon seeing this, the martial artist dressed in Du armor faltered for a brief moment, but then followed the sword cultivator without saying a single word. Qian Ping'an had no idea why the two assassins were suddenly fleeing. However, he didn't try to stop them either. Meanwhile, the Yao clan's mounted troops were even more confused as they exchanged baffled glances with each other. The old general pondered for a moment before dismounting his horse and ordering the young cavalryman who was supporting him by the arm, "Send some scouts to investigate the situation. Everyone else can stay here and rest." As if a net were being cast, 5 mounted scouts fanned out and galloped in 5 different directions. Qian Ping'an slowly walked toward Wei Xian and Pei Qian. Old General Yao wanted to say something, yet he couldn't help but hesitate. In the end, he remained silent and didn't voice his thoughts. He wanted to express his gratitude to the young boy, but a sharp pang of pain suddenly struck his abdomen as he opened his mouth to speak. He had no option but to shut his mouth. However, this didn't stop him from cupping his fists and shaking them in the young boy's direction. This could be regarded as a silent thank you. The young boy had already shown enough virtue and generosity by righteously stepping in and blocking the 2 assassins who had victory firmly in their grasp. Thus, the old general didn't have the face to take things too far and ask for even more help. 7 or 8 minutes later, another group of cavalrymen swiftly galloped over from the distance. Apart from a dozen or so members of the Yao clan drenched in blood, there were also 20-odd new faces. Those from the latter group were either chi refiners with sharp gazes and jade-like skin or martial arts grandmasters exuding vast and powerful auras. These 20-odd people were tightly bunched together as they closely guarded a man in brocade robes whose complexion was as fair as jade. The man looked to be around 30 years old, and he was evidently the master of these elites. As he approached the old general and the Yao clan's mounted troops, the man waved his hands and instructed the elites around him to move aside. They quickly obeyed his command, and the man rode forward by himself, pulling his reins and telling his horse to stop when he arrived at the front. He laughed heartily and said, "Thankfully, I haven't arrived too late, Old General Yao." The old general was just about to stand up and reply, yet the man in brocade robes had already dismounted and waved his horse whip-wielding hand in an exaggerated motion, saying, "Old General Yao, you are wounded, so there's no need to pay respects." However, the old man still insisted on standing up and walking over to pay his respects. The man in brocade robes quickened his pace and directly walked up to the old general with his horse, saying in a quiet voice, At the end of the day, the Yao clan has only suffered this calamity because of Li Shiling and me. Since I'm coincidentally at the border as well, there's no reason for me to idly stand by and watch. Please understand, old General Yao. I definitely wouldn't have come here and shown myself if it weren't for the dire nature of the situation. The old man changed the topic and said in a solemn voice, Your Highness, with your esteemed standing, how can you carelessly put yourself in danger? You are the great general of the South, a lofty second-rank official of the great Quan Empire who has risked his life on the battlefield for several decades. So is your life not esteemed and valuable as well? The man in brocade robes chuckled in reply. Your Highness! The old man exclaimed with a bitter smile. The man in brocade robes waved his hand and said with a smile, I've already come here and shown myself, and I've listened to what you had to say. Perhaps it's time for me to turn around and leave now? But how do we know that the assassins don't have something else up their sleeves? There was a helpless smile on the old man's face as he replied, I'll listen to your command, Your Highness. The man in brocade robes suddenly used his horsewhip to point at the hill nearby, asking, Who are those people? I wouldn't have survived until now if it weren't for their timely arrival and help, the old man explained. They possess a demeanor similar to that of travelers from the Mahist sect. You don't need to overthink this, Your Highness. This is but a chance encounter, so we don't need to gild the lily and complicate the situation. The man in brocade robes nodded in understanding. However, he suddenly slapped his head and hurriedly retrieved a small vial from his sleeve. He removed the cork, causing a pleasant fragrance to instantly waft through the air. He then poured out a dark green alchemical pill and handed it to the old man, explaining, This is a secret pill from the Imperial Palace that's used for treating wounds. Here you simply need to swallow it, old General Yao. The old man wasn't suspicious of any foul play as he accepted the alchemical pill and thanked the prince. He didn't hesitate at all before tossing it into his mouth and swallowing it. The smile on the prince's face grew even wider as he personally walked over to support the old general by the arm, leading him toward a carriage. Chen Ping'an stood on top of the hill and farewelled them with his gaze. After a while, Chen Ping'an retrieved his militarian armor pellet and handed it to Wei Xian. However, Wei Xian didn't accept it straight away. This is a militarian armor pellet known as divine dew-bearing armor, Chen Ping'an explained. It will become a suit of armor if you channel your true qi into it, and it will produce a suit of armor similar to that martial artists. Moreover, this armor can automatically block attacks from swords, sabers, and mystical techniques. Unless the armor is directly breached by a single attack or repeatedly attacked in the same place, it will often be a life-saving treasure as long as it has enough spiritual energy to stay active. It's extremely effective against the bonded flying swords of sword cultivators. Generally, the grade of an armor pellet was directly related to how much spiritual energy it could store. Because of this, armor pellets were roughly divided into 3 categories, which those from the mountains jokingly named puddle armor, pond armor, and lake armor. Divine dew-bearing armor belonged to the lowest rank, with almost all of them being categorized as puddle armor. However, the one sold at Stalactite Mountain's Ganoderma Inn was unique. It was very likely an ancestral armor, one from the very first batches of divine dew-bearing armor. In other words, it was an incredibly precious suit of armor meticulously crafted by a militarian grandmaster. Wei Xian pushed Chen Ping'an's outstretched hand back and said with a chuckle, I can't accept a reward that isn't deserved. It's not too late for me to accept it after I perform meritorious service. Chen Ping'an smiled and put the armor pellet away. However, there was a look of eager anticipation on Pei Qian's face as she asked, If he doesn't want it, then can you give it to me instead? Chen Ping'an completely ignored her. Afterward, the 3 of them set off in a different direction from the Yao clan's mounted troops. They were traveling toward that small town which they could vaguely see the silhouette of. As they walked, Wei Xian finally said a few words in an extremely rare display. He asked 3 questions in a row. Young master, are you trying to become a sage of morality who pursues the 3 eternal qualities? 1. Chen Ping'an couldn't help but chuckle as he shook his head and replied, Of course not. If he truly possessed such an ambition, then Chen Ping'an would have accepted the offer to become the scholarly sage's disciple a long time ago. However, Chen Ping'an's long travels through the continents, especially Parasol Leaf Continent, had caused him to become increasingly firm in his own convictions. Then do you want to seize the unstoppable trend and fight for territory and power? Wei Xian asked. Chen Ping'an was rendered speechless. He pointed at himself and asked, "Me?" Wei Xian finally asked, "Then perhaps you want to focus on self-cultivation, attain Tao, and achieve immortality? Why are you asking these questions?" Chen Ping'an retorted. Wei Xian didn't say anything else. Chen Ping'an was also unwilling to say anything more, so the three of them fell completely silent as they continued to trudge forward. Before entering a small border town, they passed by an isolated inn that had a wrinkled curtain hanging in the doorway. Chen Ping'an swirled his wine gourd around before deciding to enter the inn to purchase some wine. Chen Ping'an could taste the difference between good and bad wine, and he had drunk the Golden Millet Blessed Lands Forgetting Sorrow wine, Osmanthus Island's specialty wine, and all kinds of other wine before. At the same time, he had bought quite a lot of wine from random wine shops on the streets and alleys. However, he had never complained about anything. An emaciated dog was lying outside the inn and basking in the sunlight. When it saw Chen Ping'an, Pei Qian, and Wei Xian walking over from a distance, it immediately leaped up and bared its teeth, starting to bark at them as well. Was this how the small inn welcomed customers? A lame young boy ran out with a knife, pointing the knife tip at the dog as he fumed. "I'll chop your head off if you don't shut up." The dog lay back down in a sickly manner. The lame young boy looked up, and he hurriedly hid the knife behind his back when he saw three rare customers. He smiled and said, "Don't be afraid, customers. I guarantee that we're honest people running an honest business." As if afraid that the three customers would turn around and run away, the skinny and limping young boy decided to strike first, turning to the inn and shouting, "Ma'am, we have some customers here. Hurry up and wipe the tables clean. One of the customers is your favorite type, a handsome young master who seems to be a scholar." After reporting this delightful news to the owner of the inn, the lame young boy hurriedly turned back around, bowing and extending his hand in invitation as he said, "Please take a seat inside, customers. The green plum wine made by the madam is from a recipe passed down by her ancestors, and the roasted whole lamb made by my master is also an incredible delicacy. Both of these things are absolutely unique along this 500-kilometer border. You won't find these things anywhere else." The ground floor was a restaurant with only a few tables, presumably due to slow business. The second floor consisted of the guest rooms. There was no customer in the restaurant right now, and only a woman was standing with one foot on a long bench as she snacked on roasted seeds. She shot a sideways glance at the so-called scholar that the lame young boy had mentioned, not feeling very hopeful. The lame young boy was much like a maggot who had grown up in a pile of manure, so just what kind of knowledge and experience did he have? He would never understand the notion of handsome in his life. The woman was wearing a red robe with yellow floral patterned collars and large sleeves, and the robe was clearly stylish and made from good quality materials. However, it was quite aged, as if it were covered in a layer of grease. The woman's cheeks were a healthy shade of pink, and her body was also slender and lithe. A light complexion could mask one's ugliness, yet the woman wasn't ugly to begin with. She was already in her 30s, yet her beauty was no inferior to that of young girls in their late teens. Her eyes lit up when she saw Chen Ping'an, and she yelped in a soft and seductive manner as she threw the roasted seeds to the floor and swept them under the table with her embroidered shoes. She then purposely swayed her hips back and forth in an exaggerated manner, appearing like a slithering snake as she walked over. She raised a hand and gently placed it on the shoulder of the handsome young boy in white robes, not forgetting to give it a good squeeze. She had uncovered a gem. Not only was the young boy handsome, but his body was healthy and strong as well. He wasn't an embroidered pillow that was attractive on the outside but lacked substance on the inside. The woman was taking things further and further, and she even tried to slap Chen Ping'an's chest afterward. Only then did Chen Ping'an step to the side and cause her hand to strike empty air. He smiled and asked, "Innkeeper, I want to buy a few liters of wine. We're not here to eat or stay, and we'll leave right away after I buy the wine. I've heard that you sell green plum wine made from an ancestral recipe here, so I'm wondering how much this wine costs." The woman huffed and retracted her hand, replying, "Young master, are you in such a hurry to head to that fox town? I'm not trying to frighten you simply because I want to win business. It's simply the truth that the town is haunted by ghosts and spirits. These ghosts and spirits can lead people astray. and things have only gotten worse this year. Many merchants and travelers have been affected. None of them were killed, yet at least a dozen of them have gone insane. So young master, it's best that you stay in our inn for a while. You can purchase as much green plum wine as you want. It's not expensive. The best 5-year-old wine is only 1 tael of silver for 2 pots. You can also order a roasted whole lamb. And you can stay here for the night after you've had enough to eat and drink. When that time comes. The woman raised her eyebrows in a seductive manner and continued in a charming voice. Big sister will personally bring you some water to wash his feet. Meanwhile, Pei Qian was already drooling as she stood beside Chen Ping'an. She was unable to walk anymore after hearing the words roasted whole lamb. She wiped her mouth and gently tugged Chen Ping'an's sleeves. Chen Ping'an pondered for a moment before asking Wei Xian, "Can you drink?" "A massive amount," Wei Xian replied with a nod. Chen Ping'an turned to the innkeeper and said with a smile, "We won't stay the night, but I guess we can have a meal. Apart from the wine that we drink here, can you also prepare an additional 3 liters of green plum wine for me? I want to bring this away with me." The woman waved her hand at the lame young boy and instructed, "Go pick a lamb for your old hunchbacked master. Take some care, and remember to pick one with a good balance of lean and fatty meat. Stop dreaming about a powerful master falling from the skies and teaching you paramount martial arts techniques. Such fortune won't smash into your head. Now hurry up and piss off." The lame young boy grumbled under his breath as he sprinted away. Chen Ping'an, Pei Qian and Wei Xian sat down at a table for 4, leaving 1 chair empty. After going to the counter and grabbing a few plates of snacks, the woman returned to the table and sat in the empty chair opposite Chen Ping'an, asking, "Judging from your accent, young master, you're not a local resident of the Great Quan Empire? Are you a traveling scholar? Did you come from northern Jian nation?" "I came from further down south," Chen Ping'an replied with a smile. The woman leaned forward, bending down slightly as she grabbed a handful of dried fruits that she had purchased from Fox Town. Her large breasts pressed against the table, yet she discovered that the young boy's gaze remained fixed on her face the entire time. There was a faint smile on his face, and his eyes were also limpid and pure. This caused the woman to feel slightly astonished. There existed such a pure and innocent young boy in the world? She smiled beautifully and asked, "Why don't we have a drink together first? I can accompany you to drink a little as we wait for the roasted whole lamb to arrive. There's nothing like a well-roasted, golden lamb leg with meat falling off the bone, and eating it when you're just a little merry from the wine makes it even better." Chen Ping'an nodded and accepted her offer. The woman walked away to retrieve a pot of wine as well as 4 large white bowls that were stacked together. She then cracked open the pot of wine and filled the 4 bowls, revealing the amber color of the green plum wine. The wine appeared especially pure and clear, and just the sight of this was perhaps enough to make some wine lovers feel slightly intoxicated. The woman felt extremely proud, and she smiled as she started to introduce the green plum wine that was made using an ancestral recipe. There were 3 levels of quality, corresponding to half-year-old wine, 3-year-old wine, and 5-year-old wine. Even when it came to the lowest quality half-year-old wine, a wealthy individual who had traveled here from the capital on his handsome horse had once raised his thumb and lavished it with praise, claiming that even the capital didn't have such beautiful wine. An innocent expression on Pei Qian's face as she asked, "A wealthy person from the capital only purchased the lowest quality half-year-old wine?" The woman almost choked and she hurriedly added, "The wealthy individual only wanted to have a taste of the wine in the beginning. However, just like your young master, he also purchased several liters of 5-year-old green plum wine in the end." There was a fake smile on Pei Qian's face as she feigned realization and remarked, "I see. People from the capital of the Great Quan Empire are so reserved and stingy. It's just some wine, yet they still need to have a taste of it first? That's far inferior to. My dad directly purchased a few liters of the most expensive 5-year-old wine right from the very beginning." Chen Ping'an immediately rewarded Pei Qian with a knuckle to the forehead, causing the skinny little girl to grab her head in pain. He then pushed Pei Qian's large bowl of green plum wine to Wei Xian, letting the founding emperor of Southern Garden Nation have 2 bowls to himself. He had claimed that he could drink a massive amount of wine, so 2 large bowls of green plum wine were surely not a problem for him. Pei Qian rubbed her forehead and asked in an aggrieved voice, "Am I not allowed to even have a small sip? We've walked for so long, and I'm so thirsty that I'm almost about to breathe smoke." Her lips were indeed dry and cracked, so much so that wisps of blood were almost about to seep from them. If it weren't for the demon-suppressing talisman on her forehead allowing her to summon astonishing strength, it was almost certain that she couldn't have walked to this inn by herself. Money could make ghosts push millstones, and money could make Pei Qian walk on her own. When at the end of the day, everything was because of money, Qian Ping'an smiled and replied, "Who told you that wine can quench thirst? You can ask the innkeeper for a bowl of water instead." Pei Qian glanced at the seductive innkeeper before humping coldly and crossing her arms before her chest. She turned her head to the side and refused to look at that woman again. The woman paid no heed to this, and she stood up to bring a bowl of tea over, lightly placing it in front of Pei Qian and saying, "Here, drink some tea. It's on the inn." Pei Qian immediately grabbed the bowl of tea and gulped it down in a single breath. It was her loss if she didn't drink the tea. She did indeed detest the innkeeper, but she didn't detest this bowl of tea, did she? Qian Ping'an exchanged a glance with Wei Xian. He couldn't help but sigh in his mind, thinking that this innkeeper was also a difficult person to deal with. She liked to bear grudges, and she was no inferior to Pei Qian in this sense. When filling the bowl of tea just then, she had secretly spat into it when her back was turned to Qian Ping'an and the others. She had then rotated her wrist and gently swirled the tea around, causing all traces of her spit to disappear when she brought it to the table and placed it in front of Pei Qian. In any case, the green plum wine was truly delicious. Apart from lacking spiritual energy, it was no inferior to the osmanthus wine from Osmanthus Island. Qian Ping'an decided that he definitely had to fill his sword-nurturing gourd with this wine when they left. If this wasn't enough, then he would ask Wei Xian to carry a few additional pots with him. Wei Xian dared to claim that he could drink a massive amount of wine, so he was definitely someone who loved to drink wine, right? Qian Ping'an took small sips of the green plum wine that looked pure and light yet burned the throat and warmed the belly. His mood improved as he drank and he asked, "Innkeeper, have you ever heard of the Yao clan's border army?" "Of course," the innkeeper replied in a casual manner. "Those of us doing business near the border are all aware of the Yao clan's mighty mounted troops. I'm not trying to brag or anything, but a junior general with the surname Yao once came to my inn with his subordinates and ate an entire roasted lamb before leaving. He also left a very big silver ingot on the table. However, these soldiers are scary even when they eat and drink, and I didn't dare to approach them because they were radiating killing intent the entire time." The woman gently patted her chest, and her extremely tight and stretched garment seemed like it was on the verge of tearing apart at any moment. "Does the Yao clan's border army have a good reputation?" Qian Ping'an asked. The innkeeper smiled and replied, "How can commoners like us know things like that? We never have the opportunity to interact with these esteemed people after all. However, I can say that they aren't infamous at least. I've run this inn for 10 years now, but I haven't heard any rumors about soldiers from the Yao clan harassing people. What I hear about most is people from the Yao clan making great contributions and being rewarded by the imperial court or being promoted to higher positions. Sometimes I hear about someone from the Yao clan dying in battle in some place to the south and causing his wife to become a widow. These are the sorts of rumors that I hear again and again. I'm genuinely tired of hearing about these things." Qian Ping'an nodded in understanding. He had a rough impression of this branch of the Yao clan now, one which had migrated from Jewel Small World all the way to Parasol Leaf Continent. Wei Xian had already finished his first bowl of wine, and was now working on his second large bowl. His face was bright red, yet his eyes were extremely radiant as he commented, "This border army isn't harassing the residents, nor are they trying to build a good reputation. It's clear that they're making their stance known to the emperor. They're not trying to rebel and gain authority in the border regions. This is a smart move. Otherwise, if everything beyond the palace appears foreign and out of control, how can the emperor possibly dare to feel at ease?" The innkeeper faltered and asked, "What was that again?" Wei Xian took another gulp of wine before smacking the table and continuing, "My territory stretches to wherever my warhorses gallop. This wine is delicious." After exclaiming this, the founding emperor of Southern Garden Nation, the very same that had claimed to be a big drinker, collapsed onto the table like a dead dog. His snores rumbled like thunder. They had no choice but to stay the night in the inn now. Afterward, the lame young boy and a hunchbacked old man carried a roasted whole lamb into the inn together, placing it on Qian Pingin's table. The lamb turned out to be just as good as the wine, and this resulted in a rare occasion where Qian Pingin ate until he was extremely full. Meanwhile, Pei Qian ate until she was 200% full. In the end, she was essentially forcing lamb meat down her throat. In contrast, Qian Pingin was eating slowly and chewing slowly, and he wasn't drinking very quickly either. The innkeeper was sitting behind the counter, having politely turned down Qian Pingin's offer to eat together just then. Drinking a little wine with her customers was fine, but it would be far too shameless to eat together with them. No one would run a business in such a manner. Pei Qian ate until her belly was bulging and round, and she started to stroll around the table so that she wouldn't feel so painfully full. Qian Pingin asked for 3 neighboring rooms upstairs, giving Pei Qian the room in the middle. Afterward, he helped Wei Xian upstairs and tossed him onto the bed. The man was a weak drinker, but at least he was well behaved when he was drunk. He would fall asleep straight away and wouldn't go crazy or start ranting. Pei Qian walked inside her room and closed the door, starting to burp because of how full she was. As for Qian Pingin, he put his bamboo case in his room before walking out again, preparing to go downstairs to ask the innkeeper about the culture and customs of the Great Quan Empire. Then, he discovered that another customer had arrived at the inn. The man appeared to be 30 years old. His facial hair was unkempt, and he was dressed in a long azure robe. He sat at a table and stared at the innkeeper in a trance-like manner. However, the woman had a cold expression, and she didn't offer this customer any food or wine. In fact, there wasn't even a single plate of snacks on his table. Meanwhile, the lame young boy sat at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the man with an expression of disdain. Near the curtains of the inn's kitchen, the hunchbacked old man sat on a long bench and puffed on a pipe. Qian Pingin wasn't in a hurry to head downstairs, so he leaned on the railings and observed the situation from above. When blocking the 2 assassins attacking the Yao clan's cavalrymen just then, he had noticed that the sword cultivator clearly had another trump card up his sleeves. Qian Pingin had detected a vague aura of violence and ruthlessness in the distance, an aura that most likely belonged to a powerful great demon. The cultivation base of this great demon was at least equal to that of the sword cultivator. However, the aura of the great demon had disappeared just as quickly as it had appeared. It had been forcefully suppressed by a powerful aura of righteousness. In fact, it was because of this that the middle-aged sword cultivator had turned around and fled in a hurry, causing his subordinate, the hulking pure martial artist dressed in due armor, to flee alongside him. Upon seeing the unkempt man in azure robes, Qian Pingin's first thought was that this person was potentially the one who had hidden in the distance and killed the great demon in a single strike. Otherwise, he was potentially a prodigious cultivator from some sect-level force in Parasol Leaf Sect. If he was neither, then he was perhaps a scholar from a Confucian academy just like Zhou Yuran. However, Qian Pingin was quickly made to question his own judgment because the innkeeper viewed the man as a nuisance. The lame young boy rolled his eyes at him, and the hunchbacked old man ignored him altogether. Indeed, the impoverished man well known to the inn didn't even have the opportunity to puff himself up and act rich at his own expense. A sense of grief welled up in the man's heart, and he looked at the lady innkeeper with an intoxicated expression as he said, "Jianyang, I don't care that you're a widow, and I don't care that you have children either." Truly. Qian Pingin slapped his forehead. Disregarding this man's identity and cultivation base and simply focusing on his knowledge of romance, Qian Pingin could say that this man was even inferior to him. He fully deserved to be rejected. After all, how could one speak to women? Was this supposed to be a romantic confession? He was clearly driving a blade through the woman's heart. Sure enough, the woman who had only been cold to him just then raised her head and gritted her teeth as she glared at the bastard and spat. "Do you believe me when I say that I'll go to the sheep pen to grab a bucket of manure and pour it over your head?" Qian Pingin glanced at the innkeeper again. The man in azure lay down on the table and flailed his arms and legs in a chaotic manner, causing his sleeves to become like tablecloths. There was utter grief in his voice as he lamented. "How can you be so heartless, Jianyang? How am I supposed to live? I might be poor, but talented scholars are always punished with a difficult life. Otherwise, we can't compose beautiful poems that are passed down from generation to generation." The lame young boy furiously spat on the floor and exclaimed, Beautiful poems passed down from generation to generation? What absolute bullshit. Even an uneducated person like me is disgusted by your doggerel. The hunchbacked old man choked upon hearing the man's remark as well, and it was clear that he felt a sense of lingering fear when he heard the man claim that he could compose beautiful poems for the ages. As if suddenly becoming enlightened, the man in azure immediately sat up and said to the innkeeper with a smile, "Zhonyang, perhaps you're afraid of delaying my bright and dazzling future? Is that why you're unwilling to reciprocate my feelings? It's all right, I don't care about the views of society." The woman was genuinely unable to endure this any longer, so she instructed in a cold voice, "Little lame old hunchback, it's time to draw your blades. I'll give 10 taels of silver to whoever can hack him to death first." The hunchbacked old man didn't move, but the lame young boy was already sprinting to the kitchen to grab a knife. The man in azure stood up and straightened his clothes. He then turned around and sprinted away, disappearing in a puff of smoke. Chun Ping'an decided against heading downstairs, and instead returned to his room and closed the door. He retrieved the second picture scroll and placed it on his table. This was the picture scroll of martial arts maniac Zhu Lian. Many reclusive individuals and travelers in the world possess strange temperaments that couldn't be judged through ordinary means. However, Chun Ping'an wasn't curious about the man in azure clearly concealing his strength. Just like saber sharpener Lu Zong had said before, the road underfoot was so wide, so it made absolute sense for everyone to go their own separate ways. It wasn't as if they were all stuck on a narrow path or a single plank bridge. The unkempt and dejected man in azure didn't walk far from the inn. In fact, he squatted right outside the door beside the emaciated dog lying on the ground. He turned around to look at the dog, and felt like his life was inferior to even this emaciated dog. Emotion welled up inside him, and he felt a strong urge to compose a poem. However, after racking his brain for a long time, the man in azure was still unable to come up with one of those impressive poems that the lame young boy had labeled as doggerel. The man consoled himself, telling himself that everything was fine. Essays were written naturally, and poems would be organically formed at the right moment. On the second floor of the inn, Chun Ping'an was slightly hesitant about whether he should bring Zhu Lian out of the picture scroll. The reason for this was that he wanted to stay in the Great Quan Empire for a while longer. However, Wei Xian could only protect Pei Qian at most, so it would be very difficult for the two of them to join forces to face any potential enemies together. If he faced perilous danger as he had in the Lotus Flower-blessed land again, surrounded by enemies in all directions, Chun Ping'an was afraid that he would make a mistake amid all the chaos. After successfully bringing Wei Xian to life from the first picture scroll, Chun Ping'an hadn't offered any grain rain coin to the other picture scrolls. This wasn't because he was reluctant to use his grain rain coins. After all, it was already very impressive that Chun Ping'an hadn't chortled in delight after spending just 11 grain rain coins to obtain the service of Wei Xian, the founding emperor of Southern Garden Nation and once the most powerful person in the Lotus Flower-blessed land, someone who could face an entire army by himself. It was entirely possible that the old Taoist priest was trying to discuss Chun Ping'an without breaking the rules, giving him 4 picture scrolls that he couldn't afford to raise. Thus, Chun Ping'an naturally couldn't gamble all of his money on these picture scrolls. Grain rain coins were the most valuable type of ordinary immortal currency. After all, with 1 grain rain coin worth a whopping 1 million taels of silver. This was a small mountain of silver. After conquering the Lu Empire and becoming the dominant empire in the northern regions of Eastern Treasured Vile Continent, just how much tax did the Great Li Empire collect each year? 60 million taels of silver. Of course, this was only what the Great Li Empire's imperial Song clan obtained on the surface. Chun Ping'an had held off on offering grain rain coins to the picture scrolls these past few days due to the unusual words spoken by the young Taoist priest with the gigantic golden sword nurturing gourd on his back. That young Taoist priest was clearly trying to screw him over, and was very likely that the trap lay with the picture scroll that contained martial arts maniac Zhu Lian. Perhaps due to his status and face, the old Taoist priest had only dug a small hole for Chun Ping'an. However, the young Taoist priest had done everything in his ability to dig a large crater. Chun Ping'an retrieved all of his remaining grain rain coins and put them in a pile beside his hand. He then grabbed a single grain rain coin and gently tossed it into the picture scroll. Clouds and mist spread across the picture scroll, a sight that Chun Ping'an would never grow tired of. Sitting behind the curtain to the kitchen on the first floor of the inn, the hunchbacked old man tapped his smoking pipe on the table before standing up and walking over to the counter, glancing outside the door and saying, "That destitute scholar isn't an ordinary person." The innkeeper absent-mindedly flicked the beads on an abacus as she replied, "Third grandpa, how many times have you reminded me of this already? I'm aware of this, and I won't genuinely anger him." The old man rested his elbows on the counter and continued to puff on his smoking pipe as he said in a solemn voice, "You can remarry if you truly like him. I'll support you if your father doesn't agree to this." Jianyang stomped her feet, with her embarrassment turning into anger as she exclaimed, "What nonsense are you spewing, third grandpa? How can I possibly like him? Isn't he quite good?" the hunchbacked old man asked in a calm voice. "Even though we're unfamiliar with his identity and background, he's a young man even I can't see through. Just how many such people are there on the border of the Great Quan Empire? Perhaps his appearance will also be passable once he shaves himself clean." Jianyang directly ignored the final remark of the hunchbacked old man as she raised her chin and pointed it at Chan Pingan's room, asking, "How many such people, you ask? Third grandpa, were you able to see through the young boy in white? Were you able to see through his subordinate? You weren't able to, were you? Counting the one outside the inn and the two inside the inn, doesn't that make 3 people already?" There was a stern expression on the hunchbacked old man's face as he snapped, "You're treating my good intentions as ill will instead. It serves you right to be a widow for so many years." He was just about to return to the kitchen to cook something for himself and satisfy his belly. Jianyang was already accustomed to her third grandpa's temper, so she replied, "No matter what, the 3 people upstairs are our benefactors, so don't go and poison their food on a whim. You stripped those 2 travelers naked back then, and even tossed them outside Foxtown on the same night. They were normal men, yet you caused them to become so timid that they were like young maidens. In fact, they almost hung themselves out of embarrassment." The hunchbacked old man pursed his lips and said, "They're not sinister people who commit crimes left and right, so why would I target them and poison their food? In fact, I'm more afraid of you spiking that young boy's food and doing as you please with him." Jianyang feigned slapping someone as she spat out, "Dogs can't spit ivory from their mouth." The hunchbacked old man liked to take things literally, so he replied, "Why don't you go and speak to Prosperity outside? Why don't you ask him whether he can spit ivory from his mouth?" "I'm not a dog, so unlike you I can't talk to Prosperity," the innkeeper retorted. The hunchbacked old man pointed at Jianyang with his smoking pipe and remarked, "Whoever takes a fancy to you in the future, I can say that the lids of their ancestors' coffins will definitely be unable to keep their corpses in." Jianyang paid no heed to her third grandpa's insulting remarks. After milling around the mortal world and running this inn for so many years, she had already heard all kinds of vulgar, murderous and jealous words from her customers from all over the world. She lowered her voice and asked, "That great demon wasn't killed by him, was it?" The hunchbacked old man shook his head and replied, "If that great demon was truly the #1 general under the command of Pine Needle Lake's water god, then, only Earth immortals would have been powerful enough to slay it. Even though this sloppish scholar is definitely more powerful than he lets on, he still isn't powerful enough to pull off such a feat. He's not an old scholar who studies profound principles in the Confucian academies, after all. Moreover, those Confucian sages won't purposely go into hiding and conceal their feats after doing something, will they?" Jianyang fell into deep thought. In the end, her third grandpa persuaded, "All right, let me say this for the last time. Apart from being a little poorer, a little uglier, a little more uncouth, and a little more immature, there's actually nothing wrong with that scholar sitting outside. He's a young and strong man." Jianyang's expression turned dark. She gritted her teeth and spat, "Piss off." The hunchbacked old man was completely unfazed as he turned around and left. His aged face was like old tree bark filled with knots. If a mosquito tried to bite his face, it was perhaps possible for the hunchbacked old man to frown and squish the offending mosquito to death. He clasped his calloused hands behind his back, holding his right wrist with his left hand and holding his smoking pipe with his right. The hunchbacked old man was seemingly mumbling to himself as he said in amusement, "It's already winter, so why are there still cats meowing in heat in the middle of the night? How incredibly strange. Little Lame even asked me about this today." Jianyang flushed slightly red as she gritted her teeth and cursed, "Old pervert, It serves you right to be single for your entire life. The lame young boy had just finished clearing the table and cleaning the dishes, so upon hearing the final exchange between his hunchbacked master and the female innkeeper, he couldn't help but ask in curiosity, "Innkeeper, what in the world is going on? We're not raising any cats in the inn, so perhaps it's a stray cat that wandered over from somewhere else? I'll definitely give it a good beating if I find it. Say, we're always missing drumsticks and steamed buns in the kitchen, so it's very likely that this was the doing of the stray cat. Rest assured, innkeeper, I'll definitely find this stray cat and drag it out." Jianyang retrieved a feather duster from behind the counter and started to strike the lame young boy's head, scolding, "Go on, drag it out. Do you hear me? Go and drag it out." However, this still wasn't enough to quench her anger, so she walked out from behind the counter and started to chase the lame young boy as she beat him. The boy ran away so fast that he seemed to have miraculously recovered. Jianyang casually tossed the feather duster aside and hesitated for a moment before eventually tiptoeing up the stairs in a stealthy manner. She slowed down and walked back and forth, yet she didn't hear any noise coming from the rooms. Only then did she return to the first floor and zone out for a while. She then pushed the curtain to the kitchen aside and strode into the hunchbacked old man's territory. After grabbing a palm-sized piece of jerky and a small pot of half-year-old green plum wine, she walked outside the inn and looked at the dispirited scholar squatting beside the emaciated dog. She called out to the man in azure, and she tossed the dried meat and wine to him when he looked up at her. "That's 1 tael of silver added to your tab. It's not for free," she said coldly. Only when Jianyang returned inside the inn did the man in azure retract his gaze and say in emotion, "Prosperity, do you know what this is? Kindness from a beautiful woman is the most difficult to accept. 2. He ripped off a small shred of jerky and offered it to Prosperity, after which he stroked his unkempt beard and remarked, "Just how well will I be treated if I shave myself clean?" Chun Ping'an had gently placed his hand on the picture scroll and looked toward the door when Jianyang had stealthily tiptoed to the second floor. Fortunately, the female innkeeper hadn't knocked and disturbed him. After she returned downstairs, Chun Ping'an continued to toss money into the second picture scroll. He tossed 12 grain rain coins into the picture scroll in a single breath. However, Julien still didn't come to life and walk out of the picture scroll. Chun Ping'an grabbed his sword nurturing gourd. Yet he suddenly recalled that he had already run out of wine before entering the inn. He had no option but to put it back down. Back in Old Dragon City, the Een god from the Song clan had given him 10 grain rain coins for the bamboo slip. Afterward, Lu Tai had given him 20 grain rain coins while sharing the spoils in Flying Eagle Fortress. Accounting for what he had earned and spent in Stalactite Mountain, Chun Ping'an had started off with a total of 29 grain rain coins. He had spent 11 on Wei Xian, leaving him with 18. Right now, only 6 grain rain coins remained on the table. Martial arts maniac Julien was posing in the picture scroll, unwilling to walk out. That being the case, how many grain rain coins would the remaining 2 picture scrolls cost Chun Ping'an? There was still Lu Baixiang, the founder of the demonic force in the Lotus Flower Blessed Land, and Sui Yubian, the only female sword immortal in the history of the Lotus Flower Blessed Land. Chun Ping'an sighed as he glanced at the smiling old man on the picture scroll. He would genuinely be gambling his entire wealth if he tossed any more grain rain coins into the picture scroll. Even though he still had quite a lot of snowflake coins and lesser heat coins, even that lot was just a number. And that number would be far smaller once they were converted into grain rain coins. Chun Ping'an felt a slight sense of helplessness as he rolled up the picture scroll and placed it inside 15th. He left his room and went downstairs to drink, hoping to alleviate his worries and improve his mood. He had carried the drunken Wei Xian upstairs, forgetting to fill his sword nurturing gourd with wine. Swirling his empty sword nurturing gourd around, Chun Ping'an couldn't help but grumble in his mind as he remembered that young Taoist priest with the gigantic golden gourd on his back. The young Taoist priest had described the abilities of the 6 other sword nurturing gourds from the vine raised by the Tao ancestor, yet he had purposely not described the ability of his own. Perhaps its ability was to hold the most wine? Chun Ping'an had no idea, but he was actually correct. Well, at least he was half correct. The golden sword nurturing gourd named Abundance was indeed able to hold the largest amount of wine. In fact, it held water from the East Sea that was used in the large majority of wines. Because of this golden sword nurturing gourd's unique ability, The water level in the East Sea had actually fallen by several meters. It was also because of this that an old scholar had clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "It's but a small gourd, yet it's able to raise hundreds upon thousands of flood dragons. The Tao ancestor is truly impressive, greatly impressive, and has been impressive for a long time." Of course, the last few words could be regarded as words of flattery. In fact, it was also possible that the scholarly sage had said this because he had damaged many lotus leaves in the Tao ancestor's lotus flower world while discussing the Tao with him. Located in Middle-earth Divine Continent, the Confucian Temple, regarded as the authentic temple of decorum, contained the towering clay statues of many lofty sages. These sages definitely couldn't do something, lowering themselves to the level of flattering others and acting shamelessly after damaging someone else's property. As for the scholarly sage whose divine statue had already been removed from the Confucian Temple, however, this couldn't come any more naturally to him. He was even more adept at this than those Taoist immortals in White Jade Capital. A smile blossomed on Jianyang's face when Qian Ping'an walked downstairs. He was handsome, wealthy, and also possessed an impressive temperament. The female innkeeper became increasingly fond of Qian Ping'an. Qian Ping'an asked for half a liter of 5-year-old green plum wine, and he poured this into his sword-nurturing gourd right in front of Jianyang. However, the sword-nurturing gourd appeared like nothing more than a vermilion wine gourd to Jianyang, a cheap trinket that had been rubbed smooth due to usage. It was clear that this wine gourd was an adored trinket of at least 2 generations, and that was why it appeared aged. Jianyang rested her cheek in one hand, turning to her side on the chair such that she could cock her head and look at the young boy whose hand was perfectly steady as he poured wine. Her cheeks were slightly red, and the effects of the wine from lunch were yet to wear off. She smiled and asked, "Young master, isn't it easier to drink out of a bowl? Once you finish the wine in your wine gourd, won't you need to repeat this process and refill it again?" While saying this, she also grabbed a pot of wine and started to leisurely drink by herself. She didn't forget to grab 3 plates of snacks either. Of course, she also brought over 2 pairs of chopsticks. Qian Ping'an smiled and replied, "This is the limit of my wine tolerance, so when I finish what's in the wine gourd, I know I've had enough. I won't need to refill it again." "Your friend's wine tolerance is truly very impressive," the innkeeper said with a chuckle. Qian Ping'an couldn't help but feel slightly embarrassed. Wei Xian was the founding emperor of a nation, after all, so how could he make such a fool out of himself? He casually asked, "Since the Yao clan's border army is so renowned in the border regions, do you know any of the mighty figures currently in the Yao clan?" Jianyang raised an eyebrow and exclaimed, "Oh? Young master, you're not a spy from northern Jin nation, are you?" Qian Ping'an pointed upstairs and asked, "Have you ever seen a spy like me? One with a self-proclaimed heavy drinker for a friend? And one who even brings a child with him?" Jianyang nodded and conceded, "That does make sense. How could there be so many wars if all of the spies from northern Jin nation were like you? The world would have already achieved peace long ago." She was slightly drunk, and she failed to grab any braised meat after reaching over with her chopsticks twice. Qian Ping'an gently pushed the plate over, and Jianyang shot a charming glance at him. She decided to put her chopsticks down before saying, "It won't hurt to tell you some of these things. At the very least, I can have you barbaric southerners understand the might of our great Quan Empire's border army." She let out a burp, yet she didn't feel embarrassed at all. Old General Yao has spent more than half of his life on horseback, and he's a mighty expedition-level great general of the great Quan Empire. He has 3 sons and 2 daughters. Well, he had them at any rate. Unfortunately, 2 of his sons and 1 of his daughters have passed away. His youngest daughter married someone in the capital, and she was fortunate enough to find someone well-off and caring. They were truly a match made in heaven. He also has a bunch of grandsons and granddaughters, and 2 of them are clearly a cut above the rest. His grandson is Yao Xianji, and I heard that he joined the army when he was just 10 years old. The granddaughter is Yao Lingji, and she's even more impressive. Everyone living near the border has heard of her incredible martial arts talent. Why do all of their names end in Ji? Qian Ping'an asked in curiosity. Because they belong to the Ji generation, Jianyang replied with a smile. Free? Qian Ping'an became increasingly puzzled and he asked, "Shouldn't the generation name be in the middle? Perhaps this custom is slightly different in the Great Quan Empire." How would I know about the ancestral rules of that wealthy Yao clan? Zhonyang huffed in reply. Aren't rich people allowed to have their own quirks and eccentricities? The Yao clan's mounted troops are so renowned, so there's definitely a lot of people in the Great Quan Empire who are jealous of them, right? Chen Ping'an asked in a slightly probing manner. Zhonyang rolled her eyes and retorted. You're asking me? How should I know? Perhaps you want me to ask the emperor. She started giggling to herself and appeared increasingly seductive as she continued. But the emperor will need to take a fancy to my appearance and invite me into the imperial palace first. He might be quite old already, but he is the emperor after all. Maybe his bed frame is forged from gold as well. Perhaps she was finally talking about something that made her feel happy, so she raised her wine bowl and said loudly, the road of life might be narrow, but the wine bowl is assuredly wide. I, Zhonyang, offer a toast to you, young master. Chen Ping'an's eyes lit up, and he also raised his wine bowl with a smile, saying, what a brilliant line. I'll definitely remember this. Bottoms up. Both of them downed the wine in their bowls. The man in azure sitting outside the inn secretly glanced at Chen Ping'an and Zhonyang having a hearty conversation while drinking wine. There was a sulky expression on his face as he continued to grumble. Obedient dogs don't block their owner's path. There was a loud shout as the dejected scholar was ruthlessly kicked to the side. One after another, 3 men with sabers by their hips swaggered into the first floor of the inn. The leader was a sturdy man purposely exposing some of his muscular chest even though it was the middle of winter. He sat down at a table to the left of Chen Ping'an, and his 2 subordinates appeared especially familiar with the inn as they walked over to grab some wine and bowls. The 2 of them sat on the bench on the opposite side of the table, instantly causing the table to become full. The sturdy man refused the white bowl from his young subordinate, and he instead insisted on snatching the wine bowl that was sitting in front of Zhonyang. He poured himself a bowl of green plum wine, spilling it everywhere as he drank it in a single gulp. He wiped his mouth before suddenly clutching his stomach with a terrified expression. He pointed at Zhonyang with a shaking finger and said in a quivering voice, there's something wrong with this wine. There's poison in it. The 2 young subordinates sitting opposite him instantly placed their hands on the hilts of their sabers, with their faces becoming slightly pale. Ma Ping, do you have shit for brains? Zhonyang snapped. Perhaps you ate too much shit for lunch and there was some poison in the shit? And this poisoned shit ended up damaging your brain. The saber-carrying man chuckled and wiped the terrified expression off his face. I'm joking. There's no need to abuse me, is there? His 2 young subordinates hurriedly drank some wine to suppress their lingering fear. Ma Ping glanced at the eyesore named Chen Ping'an and demanded, where are you from, brat? Show me your travel documents and passport. Zhonyang was just about to say something, yet Chen Ping'an had already retrieved his documents and placed them on the table in front of the sturdy saber-carrying man. The sturdy man picked the documents up and examined the dense array of big and small vermilion stamps. He clicked his tongue in wonder. Whoa, you've got quite some stamps here. So you've really traveled this far. Chen Ping'an nodded with a smile. The sturdy man couldn't help but feel angered as he looked at the calm young boy. And this was because he had already grown accustomed to those submissive and obsequious commoners in Fox Town. Now that he was facing someone who didn't yield and flatter him, and most importantly, someone who happened to be quite handsome as well, he felt a strong urge to teach this young brat a lesson. Ma Ping would make the young boy understand who the leader of Foxtown was. Even tigers that left the mountains would have to obediently sit down in front of him, and even dragons crossing the rivers would have to obediently lay coiled before him. No one else was allowed to flirt with innkeeper Zhonyang. I've heard that there are ghosts haunting the town again? Who was possessed this time? Zhonyang suddenly asked. Ma Ping instantly lost all motivation to pick on Chen Ping'an upon hearing the mention of this troublesome matter. He tossed the travel documents and passport back to the pretty boy before drinking a mouthful of wine and replying in a rough and low voice. It's so fucking sinister and puzzling this time. The ghosts and spirits always targeted outsiders in the past, yet they're actually targeting a local resident of the small town this time. You're familiar with Old Man Lu who only has a single arm, right? That old geezer who owns the Joss paper shop, and often helps others look at feng shui? Well, he's gone completely mad now. It's so cold right now, Yet he still insists on running around the streets naked during the day. Not only that, but he complains about being too hot as well. We had no option but to chain him up, and he filled his entire house with piss and shit in just a few days. The smell is simply unbearable. He finally regained a sliver of sense today, and he's finally stopped mumbling about all these weird things as well. Say, that's why we hurried over here today. We wanted to ask you for a few bowls of green plum wine to muster some courage and wash away some bad luck. Jianyang frowned and asked, how have things come to this? Didn't you spend a hefty sum to invite that grandmaster over from the prefectural city? Didn't he give you a stack of immortal talismans? How did you brag about this back then? I remember you saying something like 1 talisman summoned, 10,000 ghosts pushed back. Ma Ping turned his head and violently spat on the ground, replying, Grandmaster my ass. That guy was nothing but a scammer. He completely screwed us over, and Constable Han has been making my life difficult because of this. The sturdy man exhaled and squeezed out a smile, and reached over in a bid to touch Jianyang's slender hand. However, the innkeeper quietly pulled her hand back and didn't allow him to succeed. Ma Ping smiled with squinted eyes and asked, what do you think about me, Jianyang? At the very least, I'm someone with power and influence in Foxtown, right? I make enough money, and I also come from a clean background. Not only that, but I also practice martial arts and have too much energy to spend. Are you not attracted to this? Jianyang, don't be embarrassed. Big brother Ma isn't that type of stubborn and pedantic person. I don't care about your past. Afterward, Ma Ping used the excuse of being drunk in an attempt to touch her several more times, yet Jianyang was able to successfully evade his advances each time. Ma Ping and his 2 subordinates ordered an entire table of food, and they stuffed their faces until grease dripped from their mouths. By the looks of it, they were clearly here with ulterior motives. In the end, they even refused to leave, and the 3 of them went upstairs to sleep instead. They said that they would return to Foxtown tomorrow. Chen Ping'an had moved to the neighboring table right at the very beginning, and Jianyang walked over to sit beside him as the lame young boy cleaned up the mess on the other table. She heaved a long sigh and seemed slightly exhausted as she explained with a bitter smile, Ma Ping is a constable in Foxtown, and his family has done this job for generation after generation. This job has some weak relationships with the government offices, yet just how big is Foxtown? Even the highest-ranking so-called officials in the town are nothing more than informal officials. The remainder are simply petty officials who can't even be regarded as officials. Yet, each of them is more arrogant and egotistical than the other. Upon hearing the commotion outside, Pei Qian quietly opened her door and squatted by the stairs, poking her head between the railings on the 2nd floor to secretly look at the 2 people downstairs. In the end, it took her a lot of effort to pull her head back out. She jogged downstairs, and was just about to approach the restaurant tables when she heard the innkeeper complaining about how difficult it was to deal with the petty people in the officialdom. She said that the constables would often come to the inn for free food and free drink, so she could only sacrifice this money to buy herself peace and safety. Otherwise, what else could she do? Pei Qian was extremely amused by this. A wide grin spread across her face, and she tried her very best to contain her laughter. However, she was eventually unable to hold it in, and she clutched her stomach and roared with laughter, exclaiming, "Spending money to buy peace and safety, spending money to buy Ping'an. Wah, I can't. I'm going to laugh to death. Ah. Even my tummy is starting to hurt now." Chen Ping'an stood up and walked beside Pei Qian, asking, "Does it still hurt now?" With her ear twisted, Pei Qian immediately stopped laughing, and there was a hint of pity in her voice as she replied, "My tummy doesn't hurt anymore, but my ear hurts now." Jianyang was extremely puzzled, and she had absolutely no idea what the mischievous skinny little girl was laughing about. Chen Ping'an said goodbye to Jianyang, and he dragged Pei Qian to the stairs by the ear. Pei Qian cocked her head and stood on tippy toes, and she shouted that she wouldn't dare to laugh about this anymore. Only after walking all the way upstairs did Chen Ping'an let go of Pei Qian's ear and walk toward his room. However, he didn't forget to turn around and warn, "You're not allowed to casually wander outside without my permission." Pei Qian rubbed her ear and nodded in understanding. After Chen Ping'an shut his door, Pei Qian stood beside the railings and coincidentally locked gazes with the innkeeper who was looking up. Pei Qian humped coldly and skipped back to her own room, closing her door with a loud bam. The sun began to set outside the inn, with its last rays of radiance illuminating a young girl on horseback galloping over. Her hair was tied in a ponytail, and she appeared to be 13 to 14 years old. She was beautiful and seemed gentle, yet she also possessed an aura of strength and incisiveness. There was a bow on her back and a saber by her waist, and she casually dismounted her horse and left it outside the inn, clearly not worried that it would run off on its own. The man in azure was still squatting by the door and playing with the emaciated dog. The young girl glanced at the man, yet she didn't give him a second thought. She walked into the inn and looked around, and felt slightly displeased when she saw the astonished innkeeper. She stopped and said to Jianyang, "Grandpa asked me to deliver a message to you. Don't leave the inn for the next while, as things are starting to become dangerous and uncertain." Jianyang no longer appeared seductive as she faced the young girl, and she was so dignified and refined that she seemed much like a noble daughter from a wealthy clan. She raised a finger to her lips, warning the young girl that there were potential eavesdroppers nearby. She then said in a quiet voice, "Lingji, I'm already accustomed to staying here. You don't know what's good for you." Yao Lingji exclaimed in anger. Jianyang smiled and asked, "Do you want to drink some green plum wine?" The young girl's face lit up in fury. Jianyang realized her slip of the tongue, and she couldn't help but feel slightly embarrassed and ashamed. "Give me a room. I'll leave tomorrow." "I'll give you some time to think over this carefully," Yao Lingji said coldly. The lame young boy trembled in fear as he led Yao Lingji to the second floor of the inn. After seeing the meaningful look in the innkeeper's eyes, he purposely picked the cleanest and most refined room for the young girl. After the light and nimble footsteps finally vanished from the corridor, Chan Ping'an refocused his attention on the picture scroll and stacked his 6 remaining grain rain coins together. He tossed them into the picture scroll one by one. Chan Ping'an stood up and retreated several steps after the 3rd grain rain coin vanished into the picture scroll. A hunchbacked old man stumbled out from the picture scroll. He jumped down from the table and looked at Chan Ping'an with a squinted smile. He then turned around and reached over to stroke the picture scroll, yet his hand touched nothing but thin air. Even Pei Qian had secretly touched the picture scrolls before, yet this picture scroll was seemingly close yet boundlessly distant for the old man. It was ethereal and intangible. It was untouchable. Julien wasn't angered by this, and he instead chuckled and said, "Just as I expected. Young master, is this an immortal technique of majestic world?" "You could say that," Chan Ping'an replied with a nod. This hunchbacked old man appeared vastly different from the rumors. He didn't appear like a crazed martial arts maniac at all. There was always a faint and kindly smile on Julien's face. Yet it was this person who had almost flipped the cultivation world of the lotus flower-blessed land upside down. On the contrary, his successor Ding Ying, who had inherited the title of strongest in the world, had possessed the extremely evident aura and demeanor of a superior grandmaster. However, this was definitely influenced by Ding Ying's tall and sturdy build, his unsmiling nature, and his impressive silver-colored lotus flower hat. Standing in front of Chan Ping'an, martial arts maniac Julien appeared nothing like a superior grandmaster. Compared to Wei Xian, who buried all of his thoughts in his mind, Julien was seemingly more candid and accepting of his fate. "Now that I've arrived in your world, I'll need to spend several days just to accustom myself to the flow of qi in majestic world," Julien said in an open and honest manner. "It's very difficult to say when I'll be able to return to my peak cultivation base. According to the cultivation tiers of this world, I should be at the 6th tier of pure martial arts right now." After saying this, Julien chuckled in self-ridicule and continued, "I might advance in a single burst of cultivation, but I might also hit a roadblock and remain stuck at this cultivation base for a long time. In fact, the spiritual energy of this world might even draw the true qi from my acupoints and slowly eat away at my cultivation. In any case, I have a feeling that apart from the barrier to the 7th tier, I won't face much difficulty advancing to the 8th tier and 9th tier of martial arts in the future." Julien was extremely honest with Chan Ping'an. He was indeed far more straightforward than Wei Xian, that quiet and taciturn person. Julien walked to the window and pushed it open, closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. This 7th tier of martial arts is similar to martial artists in the lotus flower-blessed land turning their acquired power into innate power. He murmured to himself, "This is the most difficult barrier to overcome." After advancing to the 7th tier, however, I believe that any further advance will simply be a case of slow cultivation and accumulation. I don't dare to claim that I'll definitely advance to the 9th tier, but it certainly won't be too difficult for me to advance to the 8th tier. Julien turned around and continued with a faint smile. Of course, I'll have a chance to fight to a draw with ordinary 7th tier pure martial artists once I grow accustomed to the abundant spiritual energy in this world. I won't be suppressed by their higher cultivation base, and I won't be so weak that I'll have to stand there and wait for death. In terms of those at the same cultivation base as me, I'll have an incredibly high chance of winning unless it's against someone like you, young master. There only exists a barrier at the 7th tier? Qian Ping'an murmured to himself. Julien walked back to the table and lightly tapped it with a single finger, saying, "Young master, I'm willing to loyally serve you for 30 years. However, I wish that you give me freedom after that. What do you say?" Qian Ping'an shook his head and replied with a smile, "I don't know how to do that." Julien was taken aback, and he fell completely silent as he stared at the picture scroll. Qian Ping'an speculated that these picture scrolls were similar to the bonded porcelains in Jewel's Small World. What did it matter even if one advanced to the unpolished jade tier and became an upper 5-tier cultivator? Their life would still be in someone else's hands. Qian Ping'an smiled upon thinking of this. Wei Xian was utterly drunk and unconscious as he lay in bed, and he mumbled in his sleep. No killing intent radiating from the body, yet murderous intent raging through the heart. Such is the demeanor of a ruler. Someone knocked on Qian Ping'an's door, so he put away the picture scroll and 3 remaining grain rain coins and was just about to walk over to answer. However, Julien surprisingly walked over to answer the door for him. Pei Qian blinked before quickly sprinting past Julien and hiding behind Qian Ping'an. Julien closed the door before turning around and chuckling. "Your aptitude is truly very impressive, little girl. Are you young master's daughter?" Pei Qian nodded earnestly in reply. However, Qian Ping'an shook his head as he turned around and asked, "Is something the matter?" Pei Qian glanced at Julien before shaking her head. Julien was a tactful person, so he smiled and asked, "Young master, is there somewhere for me to stay? After you walk out, it will be the 2nd room to your right. However, Wei Xian is already staying there, so I can ask the innkeeper for another room if you don't want to stay with someone else," Qian Ping'an replied. "There's no need to be so particular when traveling through the cultivation world," Julien said with a wave of his hand. He then rubbed his chin in thought and asked, "Young master, you chose the founding emperor of Southern Garden Nation first?" Qian Ping'an nodded and warned, "I hope the two of you don't get into conflict with each other." Julien smiled and replied, "I sincerely admire Wei Xian, someone who can oppose an entire army by himself. I can't even offer a toast to him fast enough, so how can I possibly start trouble?" Julien walked out and gently shut the door behind him. When there was only a small crack remaining, Julien suddenly asked, "Dare I ask, young master, how many coins did you spend on me?" 17 grain rain coins, Qian Ping'an replied. "I caused you to waste too much money, young master," Julien said with a smile. Pei Qian was still worried after the old man left, so she walked over to lock the door. Only then did she breathe a sigh of relief. "You're not scared of Wei Xian, who always has a stern expression, yet you're scared of Julien, who appears so kind and amicable?" Qian Ping'an asked. "I don't know, I'm just scared of him," Pei Qian replied in a soft voice. "What's the matter?" Qian Ping'an asked. "I feel like the innkeeper isn't a good person. Not only that, but there's also a lame boy and a hunchbacked old man. Just how strange is that? This isn't an unscrupulous inn that targets its guests, is it?" The storyteller under the bridge told stories about unscrupulous shops and inns before. He said that these places love to drug their guests and use their flesh to make human meat steamed buns. Qian Ping'an chuckled in anger and instructed, "Stop thinking about all this nonsense. Hurry up and go back to your room to read." Pei Qian could only sigh and return to her room. Qian Ping'an was no longer in the mood to unfurl the 2 remaining picture scrolls, one which contained Lu Baixiang and one which contained Sui Yubian. Qian Ping'an didn't really dare to bring the former to life, as he was afraid that bringing Lu Baixiang to life would be easy, but trying to keep him under control would be difficult. As for the latter, he definitely didn't dare to bring her to life. Qian Ping'an thought about Pei Qian's attitude toward Wei Xian and Julien. In reality, her intuition wasn't wrong at all. When Wei Xian looked at people, it was as if he were peering down at them from a lofty position. This was understandable, as he was once the emperor of a nation after all. When Zhu Lian looked at people, it was as if he were a living person looking at a lifeless corpse. There was gloominess in his eyes, and they appeared as deep and dark as a bottomless pool. The smile on the old man's face couldn't be taken seriously. The man in azure sat on the door threshold of the inn, and gazed up at the spectacular iridescent clouds of dusk that were lingering over the horizon. He gently patted his knee, and he would mumble about something each time he took a swig of green plum wine from his wine pot. Witnessing dragons in a sea of clouds, encountering deers deep in the forest, there sit beautiful women beside plum blossoms, there walk gallant individuals on the battlefield, there live renowned scholars in impoverished alleys. There was a loud thud. The man in azure was struck by someone, causing him to faceplant into the ground. However, he didn't forget to hold his pot of wine up, preventing it from spilling. As it turned out, the lame young boy had kicked him in the back. Is there any end to this? Are you addicted to this or something? I've already put up with you for so long. The man in azure appeared extremely disheveled as he picked himself up from the ground and patted the dirt from his body. Do you know who I am? He asked in a solemn voice. The lame young boy felt slightly diffident as he looked at the impoverished scholar, who appeared a little different than usual. However, he still mustered his courage and shouted, "Yeah, and who are you? How do you refer to Zhonyang?" The man in azure asked in a serious tone. The lame young boy faltered for a moment before replying, "Innkeeper, of course." "Then how should you refer to the innkeeper's husband?" The man in azure continued. The lame young boy was almost about to go crazy with rage. He sprinted outside and swung both his arms and legs, chasing and striking the bastard scholar. All he knew about the scholar was his surname, Zhong. The man in azure held his wine pot high in the air as he ran around and dodged. He continued to drink as he did so, and he was inevitably struck by a few of the lame young boy's chaotic attacks. However, these were mere tickles to him. The sun dipped under the horizon. There had once been a prophecy about this scholar in azure. However, even the scholar with the surname Zhong hadn't taken this prophecy seriously. The prophecy read, "The myriad ghosts in the world have nothing to fear if Scholar Zhong doesn't leave the mountains." 1. The Pingan, in Chan Pingan's name literally translates to peace and safety. Night started to set in, and the man in azure being chased by the lame young boy stopped and borrowed the last wisps of lingering light to gaze down the path to the south. The boy seized this opportunity to punch him in the shoulder, yet the dejected scholar simply swayed a little and ignored him completely. The lame young boy was slightly curious, so he followed the scholar's gaze and also peered into the distance. However, he failed to see anything, so he started to think that the scholar in azure was purposely doing this to distract him. The lame young boy was just about to punish the scholar in azure with a flurry of punches again, beating him until he didn't dare to tease the innkeeper anymore. However, his heart suddenly jolted, and he lay down and pressed his ear to the ground. His expression became serious. What he heard was a troop of cavalry, and quite a large one at that. Post attendants and soldiers would occasionally pass by Fox Town, but the small town had never been visited by large cavalry troops before. In order to admire the magnificence of the Yao clan's cavalry, the youths in Fox Town would often gather together to travel to Hanging Armor Military Town in the distance. Only then would they be able to steal a few glances at those mighty mounted troops from far away. Metal armor, warhorses, crossbows, sabers. These were the most manly things in the eyes of the impoverished youths from Fox Town. The lame young boy was no different. He was also fascinated by these manly things. It was just that the other children didn't like to play with him. At this moment, the lame young boy abandoned his pursuit of the man in azure, and walked into the inn to inform Zhonyang of the situation. Zhonyang yawned and replied that she was aware now. However, these cavalrymen definitely wouldn't take a fancy to her inn in Fox Town, so they were most likely marching through the night to head to Hanging Armor Military Town in the north. Thus, there was no need to pay any heed to them. The lame young boy nodded in acknowledgement and immediately ran outside, climbing onto the roof of the inn and holding his hand above his eyes as he peered into the distance. There was still a wisp of light remaining, just enough for one to strain their eyes and see things vaguely. The lame young boy wanted to witness the military outfits of those cavalrymen from the border. That way, he could brag and show off to other children his age when he went to Foxtown to buy oil and rice for the innkeeper. However, the last wisp of light didn't stay around for too long. This caused the lame young boy to become a little desperate, so he hurriedly climbed down the roof and ran into the inn to ask Jianyang whether he could put up some lanterns. Jianyang glared at him and asked, "You want to hang the lanterns out this early? Who's going to pay for the candles?" The lame young boy patted his chest and said, "I'll pay for them. If I can't afford them, then ask old Hunchback to pay for them first." Jianyang nodded in approval. Upon seeing this, the lame young boy was filled with delight as he ran away to hang 2 large red lanterns outside the inn. He was just about to climb onto the roof again, yet he saw a single cavalryman veering slightly off the official road and quietly galloping to the inn. The cavalryman was dressed in a bright and colorful suit of armor, in stark contrast to the plain and simple armor worn by the Yao clan's border army. The cavalryman removed his helmet and held it in front of his chest before asking with a cold expression, "Do you sell green plum wine here?" The lame young boy gulped and trembled in fear as he replied, "That's correct, Lord Soldier, we do sell green plum wine here." The cavalryman's voice was solemn as he ordered, "I want the innkeeper to clear out the entire inn in 15 minutes. Prepare 5 tables of food for us, and remember to serve the best green plum wine. We'll cover the cost and we won't pay a single copper coin less. In fact, we'll reward you handsomely if the green plum wine is truly as delicious as the rumors say. Keep in mind that we'll send people to check the rooms when we enter the inn. If anyone dares to disobey our order and stay, then we'll execute them without mercy. The guests of the inn can naturally return after we leave." The cavalryman put his helmet back on before turning his horse around and galloping off into the distance. The lame young boy appeared dazed. The man in azure was squatting outside the inn by himself, while the emaciated dog had already returned to its kennel. The man in azure had nowhere to go right now, and upon seeing the lame young boy stuck in a trance, he said in reminder, "Hurry up and inform Jianyang about this. The inn will be shut down if you offend these esteemed people from the capital." The lame young boy hurriedly sprinted into the inn, yet he discovered that the innkeeper and the hunchbacked old man were already sitting together and discussing this matter. Thus, his arrival meant that he could become the sacrificial lamb who informed the guests upstairs of the current situation. He would have to ask them to make haste and leave the inn, lest there be unnecessary bloodshed and death. The lame young boy was slightly hesitant, yet Jianyang waved her hand and said that she would clear his debt for the lantern candles. The lame young boy immediately charged upstairs, heading to Chan Pingan's room, which was the closest. He clearly explained the situation to the guest, and Chan Pingan expressed that he didn't mind leaving the inn for a moment. Chan Pingan also smiled and said that he would inform the guests in the neighboring 2 rooms, so the young boy could go and inform the other guests instead. The lame young boy thanked Chan Pingan before hurrying off to the other rooms. After returning to her room, Pei Qian lit the oil lamp on her table and flipped open a book. She smiled and said that she was reading. Chan Pingan didn't expose her lie. In reality, Pei Qian had been standing by the wall and eavesdropping on Julian and Wei Xian the entire time. She had only grabbed the book from her luggage and pretended to be reading after hearing Chan Pingan knock on the door. Chan Pingan told her to pack up because they needed to leave the inn for a while. Meanwhile, Julian had already opened the door of the neighboring room and said to Chan Pingan with a smile, "Wei Xian went to sleep again after opening the door for me. Should I wake him up, young master?" Julian was just about to turn around, yet Wei Xian, who still reeked of alcohol, had already sat up. He massaged his glabella and said to Julian and Chan Pingan, "I'm awake now." Ma Ping and his 2 subordinates swore and muttered under their breaths when they heard that a group of cavalry was passing by. However, they still obediently packed up and left their rooms. Yao Lingji, the young girl with a ponytail, was staying in the room at the end of the corridor. She was standing by the railings on the 2nd floor right now, and she stared at the innkeeper on the 1st floor and questioned, "Is this how your inn treats its guests? Well, this is truly an eye-opening experience for me. This is a border region, yet someone actually dares to act so wantonly under the nose of the Yao clan's mounted troops? I want to see who these mighty people are. After all, they're so capable that they can clear out an entire inn with a single command." The young girl placed a single hand on the railing before directly jumping down to the first floor, causing the faces of Ma Ping and his two subordinates to twitch. Where had this tough little girl come from? Jianyang smiled bitterly. She wanted to say something but couldn't help but hesitate. The hunchbacked old man held his smoking pipe and pondered for a moment before saying, "I'll head over and discuss this with the cavalry. We're running an ordinary in here, so how can we treat people differently based on their wealth and status?" The hunchbacked old man walked out of the inn, with his figure vanishing into the boundless darkness of night. Jianyang looked up at the guests on the second floor and said apologetically, "Just stay in your rooms in a moment. Tonight's matter is the inn's fault, so we'll compensate each of you with a pot of 5-year-old green plum wine after everything is over." Yao Lingji leaped back to the second floor and strode into her room, slamming the door behind her. Ma Ping and his two subordinates also huffed in anger as they returned to their own rooms. Chen Ping'an asked Wei Xian and Julian to head to his room for a while first. It went without saying that Pei Qian went to his room as well. Jianyang instructed the lame young boy to go outside so that he could bring the scholar with the surname Zhong into the inn. They would offer him a room on the second floor so he wouldn't be an eyesore outside the inn. The man in azure picked a room on the second floor before leaning against the railing and looking down at the first floor. Jianyang wagged her finger at him and said, "Piss off into your room." There was a hint of worry in the man's voice as he said, "Jianyang, you're so beautiful. So what will you do if those soldiers become touchy and forceful after seeing your beauty? Drinking wine will cause them to become even more daring and wanton." Jianyang smiled and replied, "Then that will give you the opportunity to play the role of a hero saving a beauty, won't it? If I'm blind and foolish, I might even offer myself to you to show my gratitude." The man in azure shook his hand and declared, "Noble people won't take advantage of other people. Rest assured, Jianyang, scholars all possess an aura of righteousness and a mind full of sagely principles. As long as I'm standing here, those soldiers won't be able to develop sinister thoughts no matter how much wine they drink." Before Jianyang could retort, Yao Lingji had already opened her door at the end of the corridor and drawn her saber halfway from its scabbard, causing a crisp metallic sound to ring through the air. Her voice was stern as she said to the man in azure, "Shut up, pervert." It was abundantly clear that the young girl's saber was far more effective than the lame young boy's flailing punches and kicks. The man in azure immediately entered his room without saying another word. However, the more this was the case, the more Yao Lingji felt disappointed in the woman downstairs. Day after day and year after year, Jianyang was drinking and interacting with men? How was she different from those women in the brothels? Yao Lingji entered her room and slumped down on the table. A sense of grief welled up inside her, causing her to start sobbing. Jianyang stood behind the counter and sighed. She poured herself a bowl of green plum wine. There was a loud thud. Jianyang looked up, only to see the man in azure collapsing to the floor after jumping down from the second floor. However, he picked himself up and walked to the counter saying with a smile, "Just treat me as the accountant here. I can't help but feel worried if I stay too far away from you." There was a gentle smile on his face. Jianyang faltered for a moment before replying, "But you're so ugly. I feel a bit disgusted if you get too close to me." The man in azure squatted down and held his head in his hands as if he had been struck by lightning. As it turned out, those romantic interactions and emotional confessions detailed in the novels were nothing but lies. They were all utterly useless. The hunchbacked old man walked into the inn first. A group of people walked in after him. Perhaps they were reasonable people, and they didn't insist on clearing out the guests on the second floor. They didn't have all 5 tables of people rush in at once either. The leader was a middle-aged man wearing a bright red official robe decorated with the image of a python. His face was pale and clean-shaven, and an aura of overbearing might radiated from his body. 2 people were standing behind the middle-aged man. One was suited in silver armor decorated with cloud patterns. His metal armor clinked as he walked. The other was in his 70s, dressed in a brocade robe and wearing a tall hat. He possessed the demeanor of a transcendent being. Another 7 or 8 people were further behind them, and these people were most likely their confidants and trusted subordinates. The middle-aged man in official garb sat down at a table with the man in silver armor and the man in brocade robes. Standing among the group of trusted subordinates, A young man with a jade pendant hanging by his waist smiled when he saw Jian. A whopping 700 to 800 elite cavalry were stationed outside the inn, and an additional dozen or so carriages, with each holding a prisoner and 2 guards. Without exception, the guards were all middle 5-tier qi refiners from the Great Quan Empire. The hunchbacked old man furrowed his brow. He hadn't imagined that it would be these people. These guests weren't giving face to the hunchbacked old geezer, but rather to the Yao clan. However, the face of Great General Yao and the 80,000 mounted troops of the Yao clan was only enough to make these guests go from 5 tables to 3 tables. As for why they didn't insist on clearing out the guests on the 2nd floor, this was because one of the young subordinates had casually mentioned that it would be livelier if there were more people when they drank. Upon hearing this, the domineering middle-aged man in bright red official garb had chuckled and nodded in agreement. The general in silver armor looked at Jian and instructed, "Bring us some green plum wine first. And make sure that our food comes quickly as well." The hunchbacked old man pushed aside the curtain in the doorway and entered the kitchen to cook. The lame young boy started to bring wine to the 3 tables. A heavy atmosphere hung over the 1st floor of the inn. There was almost no sound except that of wine sloshing into bowls. Someone suddenly raised their hand and waved at Jian, saying with a smile, "Innkeeper, can you personally pour wine for our brothers? I've heard that this green plum wine is personally made by you following an ancestral recipe that you've inherited. That being the case, it's only right that you personally pour the wine and serve it to us." The table of subordinates no longer felt reserved and worried when they heard the young man say this. They immediately burst into loud laughter. Jian grabbed a pot of wine and smiled as she walked over. For some unknown reason, however, she immediately tensed up when she caught the young subordinate's gaze. She had opened this inn for many years, and had seen all kinds of people from the cultivation world. Not only that, but she had also seen quite a lot of immortals and qi refiners from the mountains. Even so, she still felt a slight sense of fear when she locked eyes with the young subordinate. It was as if she were a mortal human who had come across a ghost at night. A sense of powerlessness welled up from the depths of her heart. The man in azure suddenly dragged Jian behind him and said with a loud laugh, "Jian isn't feeling well today, so how about I, the accountant of this inn, pour wine for the esteemed guests? What does everyone say?" As if hearing the funniest joke in the world, the young subordinate looked around the inn and asked, "What do you say, brothers?" Everyone naturally said no. The young subordinate looked at the man in azure and said in amusement, "Everyone says no, so what can we do? How about we stick with the original plan and get the innkeeper to personally pour wine? It's only pouring wine. It's not like we asked Jian to suit up in armor and go to the front lines, is it?" The eunuch in bright red official garb turned a deaf ear to the commotion. The old immortal wearing a tall hat smiled faintly. The young girl, Yao Lingji, opened her door and shouted with a livid expression, "This won't do." The young subordinate stood up, making him the focal point of everyone downstairs. He looked up and asked with a smile, "And why is that?" Yao Lingji felt slightly uneasy just looking at this person. She instinctively placed her hand on the hilt of her saber, and she recklessly replied, "Because this is the Yao clan's territory." Yao Lingji didn't notice the killing intent rising in all of the subordinates' hearts the instant that she placed her hand on the hilt of her saber. This was especially the case with the general in silver armor sitting beside the eunuch in bright red official garb, and the old immortal wearing a tall hat. He was already brimming with killing intent. The young subordinate was craning his neck and gazing up at the 2nd floor. Yet it was as if he were paying close attention to everything that was happening on the 1st floor as well. He raised a hand and signaled for everyone to calm down and not act recklessly. He then smiled faintly and said, "But the entire Great Quan Empire is the territory of my family. What should we do now? Perhaps the Yao clan wants to launch a rebellion." Jian held a wine pot and walked out from behind the counter, turning to the young girl first and ordering, "Go back to your room, Lingji." She then curtsied to the young subordinate and said, "I'll pour some wine for you straight away, young master." A smile tugged at the corners of the young subordinated lips as he stared at Jian's face. He pointed at the young girl upstairs and said, "Why don't the two of you, mother and daughter, serve me together?" Jian's face instantly became as pale as paper. However, a door upstairs suddenly opened, and a young boy in white robes walked out and said, "I don't fancy that idea." The young subordinate looked up at the nosy person and asked with an amused smile, "Oh? And just who do you think you are, little spring onion?" This time it was someone from the first floor who answered this question for Qian Ping'an, retorting, "And just who do you think you are, little spring onion?" It was the dejected scholar in azure with the surname Zhong. The young subordinate sighed in grief and lamented, "Wowie, one after another. Everyone is trying to go against my will tonight. An inn that's unwilling to shoo its guests away, an innkeeper who's unwilling to serve wine, a young girl from the Yao clan who's speaking impudently, an outsider who thinks he's a sword immortal just because he's wearing a white robe, and a scholar who thinks he's a Confucian sage just because he's wearing an azure robe." He suddenly glanced at Zhongyang before glancing at Yao Lingji, smiling and saying, "It's okay, the two of you can try to save the Yao clan tonight. If you satisfy me and put me in a good mood, perhaps I might help you drag the Yao clan from the brink of death." Zhongyang took a deep breath. As if making up her mind, she turned to the scholar in azure and said, "Zhong Kuei, this matter has got nothing to do with you. I know you have some skills, so flee if you can in a moment. Don't worry about us." She then looked up at Qian Ping'an, and was just about to say something to the young boy. However, Qian Ping'an had already smiled and said, "Innkeeper, what did you say to me before?" Zhongyang was slightly puzzled, and this caused her to fall silent for a moment. The road of life might be narrow, but the wine bowl is assuredly wide. Qian Ping'an murmured to himself. The road was narrow, so he had come across the Yao clan that was affiliated with that locust leaf. The road was narrow, so he had come across these people who acted wantonly and wished to sever everyone else's roads. However, this didn't matter because the green plum wine here was delicious. "I'll need to trouble the four of you today," Qian Ping'an said in a soft voice, under the watchful gazes of everyone, for people walked out from the room behind the young boy in white. Wei Xian, the founding emperor of Southern Garden Nation, walked out first, and there was a stern expression on his face as he said, "There's no need to be polite." Martial arts maniac Zhu Lian walked out next, and the hunchbacked old man stood on the other side of Qian Ping'an with his hands clasped behind his back. "There was no need to say that, young master," the old man chuckled. A stunningly beautiful woman stood beside Wei Xian with deep infatuation strapped to her back. She was none other than Sui Yubian, the female sword immortal from the lotus flower-blessed land. She appeared cold and aloof as she said, "Thank you for lending me this sword, young master." Finally there was Liu Baixiang, the tall and sturdy founder of the lotus flower-blessed land's demonic force. He was standing beside Zhu Lian, and his hands were resting on the hilt of his saber whose tip was digging into the floor. He smiled faintly and remarked, "Young master, this saber is quite impressive. Its name, Halting Snow, is quite good as well." At the very end, a soft and weak voice sounded and asked, "What about me, Dad? Go back to your room and keep reading." Qian Ping'an replied in slight helplessness. The skinny little girl closed her door and started to read at the top of her lungs, causing the sagely principles in the book to reverberate throughout the inn. The scholar on the first floor listened to the loud recitation of the little scholar on the second floor. 1. Apart from the little scholar reciting, however, there also stood Qian Ping'an, Wei Xian, Zhu Lian, Sui Yubian, and Liu Baixiang. There were all kinds of people in the inns near the border tonight. Yao Lingji's breathing became heavy when the 5 people walked out of Qian Ping'an's room. This was simply inconceivable for her. Her feeling of dread toward the young subordinate was the combination of many complicated emotions. She was a frail young girl facing a man with ulterior motives. She was a lower-ranked person feeling respect and fear toward a higher-ranked person's intangible aura of power and influence. And she was an innately good person who would instinctively distance herself from evildoers. However, Yao Lingji's sense of suffocation was very clear and direct when she faced those 5 people on the second floor. It was as if she were a rabbit or deer coming across tigers and bears in the mountain, as if she were a fish or shrimp coming across flood dragons in the river. Yao Lingji had already served as a scout for 3 years in the border army. Not only that, but she had also engaged in 2 life-and-death battles. Even so, she had never thought about retreating, not even once. That being the case, she shouldn't be feeling these emotions at this moment. She was the most prodigious martial arts talent in this generation of the Yao clan, and had already reached the 4th tier even though she was only 14 years old. Moreover, she had the chance to advance even further. Regardless of whether she advanced to the 5th tier when she was 15 or even 17, she was still a legitimate prodigy. Yao Lingji was one of the best quality unpolished jades in the army and the cultivation world, so she could definitely unleash a spectacular radiance once she was slightly carved and polished. No one doubted her ability to easily reach the 7th or 8th tier in the future, and everyone expected her to become a martial arts grandmaster who could watch over an entire region in the future. In the cultivation world, grandmasters often battled those at a similar level to them. On the battlefield, however, elites sought to become formidable warriors who could rival hundreds or thousands of enemies by themselves. Yao Lingji tightened her grip on an item that looked like a silver ingot. This was a ludicrously expensive Militarian armor pellet. It wasn't the dew armor that chi refiners from the mountains joked about in disdain and referred to as puddle armor. Instead, it was a higher-tier golden crow armor, a kind of pond armor. It was a genuine immortal treasure. Judging from this, one could see the lofty hopes and expectations that the Yao clan's border army had placed in Yao Lingji. The young subordinate looked up at the 5 people on the second floor, smacking the table in mock anger and questioning, "You're attempting to frighten me through numbers?" However, a smile was tugging at the corners of his lips as he spoke. 3 tables of his people were inside the inn, and also hundreds of elite cavalry were stationed outside the inn. Perhaps feeling like he was being too shameless at this moment, he eventually couldn't help but laugh out loud. The 2 tables of elite soldiers also started to chuckle. They didn't take the commotion on the second floor seriously at all. Even though the 5 people all possessed powerful auras, powerful enough to astonish them, what did this matter? They were nothing more than simple brutes from the cultivation world. Those in the Great Quan Empire's cultivation world had already lost their spine long ago. They were like servile dogs that lay outside the imperial court and furiously wagged their tails to beg for mercy. And the person who had personally snapped and shattered the spine of the entire cultivation world was coincidentally sitting in the inn right at this moment. He wasn't here for a simple holiday. The innkeeper with the nickname Jianyang didn't breathe a sigh of relief because of Chen Ping'an's appearance. When instead, she felt increasingly solemn and anxious. Third Grandpa had already revealed his identity to these people just then, yet they had still insisted on coming here to force them into submission. It was clear that they were targeting them because of their surname, Yao. If Jianyang and the others entered a conflict with these people, the most frightening outcome would be these people becoming serious and targeting the entire Yao clan. Third Grandpa, the hunchbacked old man, stood behind the kitchen curtain and nodded at Jianyang. A bitter smile appeared on her face. It was clear that the young subordinate wasn't acting unreasonably because of the wine. Rather, it was very possible that he harbored ulterior motives and was trying to cause a conflict. He was potentially trying to frame and destroy the entire Yao clan. Jianyang understood that inaction was the best action for the Yao clan during these tumultuous and uncertain times. Because of this, she and Heron needed to restrain themselves wherever they could. However, could she persuade the 5 people on the second floor to retreat at this moment? They were stepping forward to help her, so could she tell them to fall back and shrink into their shells like turtles? Jianyang couldn't bring herself to do this. Zhong Kuei, the scholar in azure, appeared slightly puzzled as he asked, "These people are? They're esteemed guests from the capital. We can't afford to offend them," Jianyang replied with a bitter smile. Zhong Kuei nodded in understanding, and he hesitated for a long time before opening his mouth to say something. However, Jianyang cut him off and said in helplessness, "Please, Zhong Kuei, I'm begging you, don't cause trouble and make things even worse than they are. The situation is already troublesome enough, so I'm not in the mood to entertain you right now." Zhong Kuei sighed in response. Sure enough, however, he didn't say anything else. Chen Ping'an looked down at the first floor and asked, "To pick on the innkeeper, a woman? Is this not unfair?" The young subordinate chuckled and replied, "She's running a business here, so is it unfair to ask her to serve her customers some wine?" Chen Ping'an pointed at the young man's heart and said, "Ask your own conscience." The young man faltered upon hearing this. However, he quickly grabbed his wine bowl and drank a large mouthful of wine before wiping his mouth and chuckling. I would have definitely stopped to ruminate on these words if the Confucian Academy's Mr. Chu were the one who had uttered them. You, however, are you worthy of speaking these words? Principles are principles no matter who speaks them. Is this not the case? Chen Ping'an asked with a smile. Does it make a difference whose mouth these words come from? You're simply someone who picks on the weak and fears the strong, aren't you? If someone possesses greater strength than you, I assume you'll listen to them regardless of whether they're right or wrong. Am I correct? The young man nodded and replied, I can accept these words. They do indeed make sense. He then threw his wine bowl aside with a casual toss and raised his hand high into the air, spreading his fingers apart before gently clenching them into a fist. Then let's have a go and see who's stronger? I want to see how many people dare to challenge me in the territory of the Great Quan Empire. Jian was worried about Chen Ping'an being young and reckless, resulting in him attacking first and suffering a big loss as well as being in the wrong at the same time. Thus she hurriedly said in warning, Please don't be impulsive, young master. These people are here on official duty from the capital, and they're acting under the orders of an imperial decree. Even if you're in the right, you'll still end up in the wrong if you carelessly attack them first. A dark look appeared in the young subordinate's eyes, and he turned to Jian and scolded, Shut your trap. Does a slutty widow like you have the right to interrupt me? Do you know who I am? Jian's expression was livid. The young subordinate pointed at Jian before pointing at Chen Ping'an, and he chuckled coldly. Jian from the Yao clan, you're secretly joining forces with a foreign power and attempting to hijack the prisoner carriages. This is a reprehensible crime. Jian was filled with grief and indignation, and she finally couldn't suppress her emotions any longer, shouting in fury, Just who the hell are you little bastard? The young subordinate pointed at himself and asked with an innocent expression, Me? A little bastard? He cleared his throat and straightened his collar before smiling faintly and continuing, According to Lady Yao's accusation, Gao Shizhen is indeed an old bastard. Haha, isn't this funny? I'll definitely repeat this joke to Gao Shizhen when I return home. Jian exchanged a glance with the hunchback third grandpa, with both of their hearts jolting at the same time. He was the last remaining duke of the Great Quan Empire, and was a deeply trusted subject of the current emperor. The Great Quan Empire had enjoyed peace for a long time, with the imperial Lu clan having ruled the nation for more than 200 years already. When founding the empire, the first emperor had bestowed 3 people with the title of county king and 7 people with the title of duke. However, only Duke Gao Shizhen's hereditary title had managed to survive until today. As for the others, the descendants of those clans had already used up the fortune that their ancestors had risked their lives to obtain. Duke Gao Shizhen only had a single child, and had only gained this son in relatively old age. His son was none other than little Duke Gao Shuyi, someone who was renowned for his domineering nature in the capital and throughout the imperial court. He had caused huge trouble after huge trouble, yet he had always escaped punishment and remained safe and sound thanks to his ancestral blessings. In fact, the emperor was more lenient toward Gao Shuyi than he was toward the many princes and princesses. Thus, there was a popular saying in the officialdom of the capital, The earth will shudder and the mountains will shake when the little duke leaves his home. He was such a notorious good-for-nothing descendant of a powerful person, so how was he sent on this mission to the south? Even though the emperor gave preferential treatment to Duke Gao Shizhen's family, his wisdom meant that he definitely wouldn't treat this mission with such carelessness. The most fearless troublemaker person in the Great Quan Empire was most likely Gao Shuyi, this unruly young man. Song Shao was a brilliant general and the head minister of the Ministry of War, yet he had only been able to scold Gao Shuyi as a troublemaker after his grandson was bullied and harassed by this little duke. Standing behind Chen Ping'an on the second floor, Wei Xian quietly explained the duke's background and position to the young boy. Chen Ping'an nodded in understanding. Just as everyone thought that he was going to retreat in the face of difficulty, he immediately used a land-shortening talisman and jumped down from the second floor, arriving before little Duke Gao Shuyi in an instant. On the road outside the inn, a cavalryman was sitting behind a carriage driver and chewing on some hard-to-swallow rations. He occasionally lifted his canteen to take a gulp of water. He looked up and saw a messenger pigeon flying out from the inn. Someone immediately sprinted over and waited for the cavalryman to issue his command. There was a snow-white and majestic-looking falcon on this person's shoulder. However, the cavalryman waved his hand and said, "Ignore it." The person silently retreated. The cavalryman was none other than the messenger who had informed the inn of their imminent arrival just then. The carriage driver was sitting extremely straight, not daring to move at all. An old man pushed the carriage curtain aside and asked with a smile, Why didn't you enter the inn with them, Your Highness? The cavalryman smiled and shook his head. Self-discipline was a profound subject. To descendants of royal families like him, controlling and using other people wasn't very difficult. He had witnessed and experienced this control since a young age, and he could also learn many valuable lessons from the history books. There were 2 chi refiners sitting cross-legged inside the carriage, one old and one young, and they were responsible for guarding one of the most important prisoners and escorting them to Mirage City, the capital of the Great Quan Empire. The person who had posed the question to the cavalryman just then was an old man in his 80s. He was wearing a purple Taoist robe, and there was also fishtail hat on his head. He held the end of a rope in one hand and a fly whisk in his other. The prisoner had disheveled hair and was drenched in blood, and his head was hanging low as he remained completely silent. His appearance couldn't be seen clearly. His golden robes were in tatters, and something similar to golden vajras had been nailed into his wrists and ankles. Apart from these, there was also a pitch-black rope tied around his neck, with the other end of this rope resting in the old chi refiner's hand. However, the most pitiful thing about the prisoner was the fact that a flying sword had pierced through his glabella and was sticking out from the back of his head. Indeed, the flying sword remained in his head just like that. This important prisoner was an official deity of the mountains and rivers. He had once been a chi refiner at the peak stage of the 7th tier, and his combat power would rise to at least the 8th tier when he was inside his own jurisdiction. He was like the ruler and sage of an area, and he could even hold his own against 9th tier, golden core tier immortals. However, he had now been reduced to this miserable state for some unknown reason. Apart from the old Taoist priest, there was also a young woman sitting inside the carriage and guarding the prisoner. There was affection in her eyes as she gazed at the cavalryman, and her feelings toward him were clear even though she didn't speak. The young woman could only be regarded as delicate and pretty, yet her disposition was incredible and her skin was paler than snow. Compared to the mortal interpretation of beauty, she was more capable of withstanding scrutiny. After all, mortal beauty was ultimately nothing more than surface-level beauty in the eyes of cultivators from the mountains. Mortal beauty was the beauty of mortal flesh, one with rough skin, pungent smells, and all kinds of imperfections that couldn't withstand scrutiny. The cavalryman suddenly turned his head to look toward the inn, with a seemingly surprised expression appearing on his face. The old Taoist priest was also slightly astonished and he remarked, "What an astounding martial arts aura! Moreover, there's this many of them? Just how many powerful individuals are hiding in this small inn on the border?" Perhaps Little Duke was correct by accident? Perhaps the elites of Northern Jian Nation are truly taking a huge gamble and attempting to rescue the prisoners. "Should I leave to warn the Duke?" the young woman asked in an uncertain voice. The cavalryman shook his head and replied with a smile. "The land underfoot belongs to the Great Quan Empire. So how can we face any danger unless the Yao clan truly decides to rebel?" An intense glimmer flashed across the old Taoist priest's eyes, yet he remained silent and didn't say anything else. A moment passed and he was just about to make another comment. However, the cavalryman had already hopped off the carriage and was directly walking toward the inn. After the cavalryman walked a fair distance away, the young woman who hailed from an immortal clan in the mountains asked in a soft voice, "Master, Little Duke is forcing those members of the Yao clan into a corner, yet His Highness isn't restraining Little Duke at all. Will things truly be fine?" The old Taoist priest waved his hand and dismissed. "Anyone in the world might become a rebel and a traitor, and the only exception is the Yao clan. They've already been loyal subjects for too long." A cold smile tugged at the corners of the old Taoist priest's lips as he continued. "And they've already grown addicted to this status and sensation." The prisoner suddenly lowered his head even further, laughing with delight as he exclaimed, "You're actually speaking about loyal officials and pillar border generals in such a mocking tone? So what if your Great Quan Empire is the dominant force right now? Will you be able to maintain this power? You still dare to speak so stubbornly?" The old Taoist priest flicked his wrist, causing the pitch-black rope to instantly tighten around the prisoner's neck. The prisoner's entire body started to shake, yet he still grit his teeth and refused to make a sound. Meanwhile, there was a sudden and unexpected turn of events in the inn. A young boy dressed in white robes suddenly materialized on the first floor. A sense of foreboding welled up in little Duke Gao Shuyi's heart. and he was just about to retreat in fright. However, all he saw was a blur as the young boy reached over and grabbed his shoulder. On the nearby table of 3 people, the eunuch in bright red official garb continued to enjoy his green plum wine, paying no heed to the commotion on the first floor. Meanwhile, the esteemed immortal wearing a tall hat and the general suited in silver armor had already shot up from their seats, wanting to rescue Gao Shuyi. However, they quickly stopped in their tracks. This was because a blood-red sword had flown down from the second floor with its owner. The blade was hovering between the 2 tables, and the sword tip was directly pointing at the esteemed immortal wearing the tall hat. The general in silver armor stopped and turned around, only to see someone take several steps on the second floor. A wide smile on their face as they gripped the hilt of their saber. Halting snow was on the verge of being drawn. The short man Lu Baixiang hopped over the railing and landed near the entrance of the inn. It was as if he wanted to block the small army of several hundred cavalry by himself. Meanwhile, the hunchback Zhu Lian was squatting on the railing and smiling with squinted eyes. He looked down and set his sights on the calm eunuch. The eunuch in bright red official garb looked to be in his 30s, yet he was actually an old man in his 80s already. He was one of the few martial arts superior grandmasters in the Great Quan Empire, and was widely regarded as the imperial guard of the Great Quan Empire's imperial city. Ever since he shot to fame, the Great Quan Empire, which had once been haunted by many ghosts and spirits, no longer experienced any supernatural phenomena. It was as if all of the ghosts and spirits had gone into hiding. However, the true power and influence of this eunuch lay somewhere else. Back then, he had recruited a large group of subordinates from the cultivation world to target a dozen or so of the most top-notch martial arts forces inside the Great Quan Empire. He had eradicated them one by one, drowning the entire cultivation world in blood and chaos for 3 years. Many people had attempted to assassinate the old eunuch, regardless of whether they were from righteous forces or sinister forces. However, all of them had suffered the same fate, meeting their demise before they could succeed. Of the 2 people who had shared a table with him just then, the esteemed immortal wearing a tall hat was called Su Tong. He was the current leader of the Flora Convent, and he was skilled at lightning element techniques and also able to summon ghosts and deities to assist him. He was also adept at alchemy, and nobles and officials in the Great Quan Empire would fervently fight over the alchemical pills that he refined. The general in silver armor was called Su Qingzhou, and he was one of the most powerful elites serving in the army of the empire. He was yet to reach 40, yet his martial arts prowess had already reached a zenith. The saber by his waist, modesty, was also an extremely precious militarian treasure that was incredible at both offense and defense. General Su Qingzhou would definitely lead the charge in battle, cutting down his enemies and sweeping away all obstacles. Gao Shui channeled his qi and tried to break free. However, his struggle was a futile one. He wasn't afraid, however, and the smile on his face grew even wider as he asked, "Is the Yao clan genuinely trying to revolt?" Chen Ping'an tightened his grip slightly, causing a sharp pang of pain to shoot through Gao Shui's shoulder. However, the little duke still tried his best to maintain his smile. "I'm merely a passerby, so I can simply flee to northern Jin Nation after killing you, someone who likes to provoke me so much for whatever reason," Chen Ping'an said. "As for the Yao clan and whether they're rebelling or not, you can sling as much mud as you want. It's not like I can stop you or anything. Who would believe this nonsense?" Gao Shui bared his teeth as beads of sweat formed on his forehead. "Heh. Then kill me if you're so capable." Chen Ping'an stared intently at him. Gao Shui's voice was extremely quiet as he whispered to Chen Ping'an, "Do you know what? It's that mother and daughter's fortune that I've taken a fancy to them. Otherwise, they'll be sent to a high-class brothel once the Yao clan is eradicated, and they'll become prostitutes freely enjoyed by anyone. You can also have a taste of their bodies when that time comes." Little Duke Gao Shui had only just finished speaking, yet Chen Ping'an's fist had already arrived in front of his face. It directly smashed into Gao Shui's forehead. The punch was strong and sturdy, and was much like a boulder slamming into a city wall. Gao Shui's head whipped back. The jade pendant hanging from his waist glowed with a 5-colored radiance that instantly flew up and gathered around his forehead. Yet Gao Shui still lost consciousness due to the power of the punch, with white froth coming from his mouth. Cracks appeared on the surface of the life-saving jade pendant. Chun Ping'an was still gripping Gao Shuyi's shoulder, so this caused the little duke's head to sway back and forth like a swing. Chun Ping'an immediately threw a second punch. This was a simple attack, yet it was one that would affect the entire situation. There was a loud slap. The eunuch in bright red official garb smacked his chopsticks to the table before ordering in an effeminate voice. "That's quite enough, young lad." Even though his impression of the scheming and cunning little duke was only so, he still couldn't allow Gao Shuyi to be ruthlessly beaten to death in front of his very eyes. Esteemed immortal Su Tong and General Su Qing, Zhou both breathed a long sigh of relief when they heard the eunuch speak up. However, Chun Ping'an's punch didn't stop. Gao Shuyi's ancestral jade pendant shattered into pieces. Gao Shuyi surprisingly regained consciousness following the disintegration of his jade pendant. His face was beet red and his eyes were bloodshot, and he bellowed with a twisted expression, "Fucking bastard, I'm definitely going to kill you along with the Yao clan." The eunuch in bright red official garb abruptly stood up in rage. Just how many years had it been? Yet, someone still dared to act so wantonly in front of him? "Stop!" Jianyang shrieked. Chun Ping'an turned his head to look at her, and he could see the deep anxiety in her eyes as she lightly shook her head. She wanted to explain the situation, yet didn't dare to reveal the truth, so she could only say, "Please calm down and discuss things in a civilized manner, young master. Let's sit down and talk over things slowly. I'm sure that the little duke is only joking with us." However, the enraged eunuch ignored her words and directly delivered the final judgment, announcing, "There's no need to discuss any further. The Yao clan has joined forces with Northern Jin Nation to start a rebellion, so the punishment is death." As he spoke, the eunuch held two fingers together and swiped them across the table. First and 15th burst out from Chun Ping'an's sword-nurturing gourd, shattering the two chopsticks that were shooting through the air like lightning. Chun Ping'an's third punch sent Gao Shuyi flying back. Wei Xian shuffled aside, allowing the little duke to fly out the door and crumple to the ground outside the inn. The young cavalryman had just arrived near the inn, and was temporarily transfixed with shock as he looked at the corpse on the ground. He was clearly unable to believe his eyes. Chun Ping'an turned to Jianyang and asked, "Do you know why old General Yao almost fell victim to an assassination attempt? It's because the Yao clan is too soft. Someone clearly believes that the Yao clan will only dare to seethe in silent anger even if old General Yao is killed." It was as if Jianyang didn't hear Chun Ping'an's words, and her expression was dazed as she murmured, "He's dead. You killed him just like that. The Duke will definitely go crazy, and the Emperor will definitely become furious. The Yao clan is done for." Third Grandpa, the hunchbacked old man working as a cook in the inn, was also at a complete loss. There was shock and horror on Yao Lingji's face. The inn fell silent bar for the listless sound of the skinny little girl reading in her room on the second floor. It was also at this moment that the impoverished scholar in azure patted Jianyang's shoulder. He clearly had his back to Chun Ping'an, yet his voice clearly sounded in Chun Ping'an's mind saying, "Feel free to kill as many of them as you want. I'll take responsibility for burying them." Chun Ping'an was slightly skeptical of the impoverished scholar's words. The old Taoist priest in the lotus flower blessed land had once led him through the blessed land, and allowed him to witness all kinds of people and emotions. Chun Ping'an was somewhat familiar with the ego of an imperial court, so he had already prepared to flee to the south before making the decision to throw hands. Even so, it was still possible that Qi refiners from the Great Quan Empire would hunt him for thousands of kilometers. Moreover, it was definitely difficult for the impoverished scholar surnamed Zhong to deal with this troublesome matter. This was the case even if he happened to be from one of the largest sects in Parasol Leaf Continent such as Parasol Leaf Sect, Jade Tablet Sect, Planchette Writing Sect, or Peace and Tranquility Mountain. As for whether this scholar in azure was from a Confucian school or a Confucian academy, Chun Ping'an was more inclined to believe that he wasn't. This was because in Chun Ping'an's experience, virtuous scholars and noble scholars from Confucian academies were both unwilling and not allowed to carelessly interfere in the private affairs of mortal empires, unless the issue pertained to the legitimacy of the empire. In any case, Chun Ping'an appreciated the scholar's goodwill. However, he wasn't so careless as to turn around and look at the scholar, lest he alert his enemies to their communication. Right now, Chun Ping'an was most apprehensive of the eunuch dressed in bright red official garb. The eunuch's spiritual energy was abundant, and had already reached an impressive state of being watertight. It was as if a lantern was hanging in his dantian and illuminating his acupoints, flickering with each long and calm breath that he took. It was brighter for longer than it was dim, yet it was unable to maintain this brightness for extended periods of time. Even though the eunuch wasn't a genuine golden core tier earth immortal, it was very likely that he was only a small step away from becoming one. Of course, this small step also implied a gulf that was as large as the distance between heaven and earth. There was a common saying in the mountains, "Those who form a golden core will become one of us." However, only earth immortals from the mountains had the right to utter these words. To all chi refiners at the middle 5 tiers and all pure martial artists under the wing formation tier, those who had formed half a golden core were still extremely lofty beings. Their each and every action was filled with astonishing might. Several chi refiners gracefully hovered over and landed beside the young cavalryman. Among these chi refiners was the old immortal in his 80s from the carriage as well as the young female cultivator. Behind the dozen or so chi refiners, the hundreds of elite cavalry rapidly left their current formation and completely encircled the small inn, holding specially crafted imperial crossbows in their hands. Reports needed to be made to the Ministry of War each time these weapons were taken out of storage, and there also existed many checks and balances to carefully inspect the damage, destruction, or loss of these weapons. The young cavalryman squatted down, looking at the wide-eyed corpse of his good friend of many years. Gao Shui's face was filled with shock, terror, and confusion. The young cavalryman gently ran his hand over the little duke's face, closing his eyes once and for all. It was abundantly clear that he was the true leader of this group. Meanwhile, the corpse on the ground, little Duke Gao Shui, who had already drowned to death in the cultivation world, was only his study companion. In reality, Gao Shui wasn't the only person with such a status. There were 2 other young men inside the inn, and they were both the prince's study companions. They weren't officials, and didn't receive a salary from the imperial court either. Rather, they were descendants of wealthy clans who hoped that their prince would one day become the crown prince. Of course, it would naturally be even better if he could directly go from prince to emperor. The young cavalryman was Lu Mao, the 3rd prince of the Great Quan Empire. Even though the first prince and the second prince had extremely good reputations among the scholarly officials and military generals, respectively, 3rd Prince Lu Mao was the favorite prince of the emperor right now. Moreover, there were rumors in the streets and alleys that the 3rd prince had liked to secretly leave the imperial court and journey around the world ever since a young age. Each time he returned home, he would always bring with him a bucket load of stories from the cultivation world and country regions that were sure to amuse the emperor. Not only that, but 3rd Prince Lu Mao's late mother had also been the emperor's favorite concubine in the past. She had passed away very young, so Emperor Lu Zhan was an extremely doting father to Lu Mao. As a consequence, he was also very generous toward Lu Mao's study companions, youths who had been selected and sent over by old officials such as Gao Shizhen. Lu Mao stood up and instructed someone to carry Gao Shui's corpse away. He then looked at the inn and asked in puzzlement, "I'm quite confused right now. You're trying to save the Yao clan, so why did you insist on killing the son of the duke? Why didn't you wait for a moment longer until the messenger pigeon from the inn delivered the news to the Yao clan? Why didn't you wait for old General Yao to arrive and resolve the situation? Is there still room for negotiation now that you've killed Gao Shui?" Wei Xian found this fairly interesting as he leaned against the doorframe. Yao Zhan, the great general of the south, had just faced an assassination attempt and been seriously injured. Thus, he might not have rushed to the inn personally even if he received news of the situation. Instead, he would have most likely dispatched a trusted descendant of the Yao clan over to mediate with Gao Shui, who was barking and biting people like a crazed dog. The scheming 3rd prince of the Great Quan Empire had used the beautiful excuse of coming here to taste the renowned green plum wine. However, it was clear that he was here to lead a sheep in his desired direction. And who was this sheep? It was naturally Yao Zhan, the leader of the Yao clan's cavalry, and someone who wielded massive power and influence on the borders. Gao Shui hadn't feigned all of his unruly and domineering nature. Thus, it struck just the right balance for him to step forward and provoke all of the descendants from the Yao clan except for old General Yao Zhan. If Yao Zhan personally came to the inn, however, then Gao Shui wouldn't be suited to this role anymore. He wasn't Duke Gao Shizhen after all, and his seniority was lower than that of Yao Zhan as well. On the other hand, Gao Shui could wantonly threaten and abuse the descendants of the Yao clan as long as Yao Zhan didn't come. Thus, it wouldn't make any difference regardless of how many descendants from the Yao clan came. They would simply be wasting their own strength and adding fuel to the fire, causing the situation to become even dire. Wei Xian dared to assert that Emperor Lu Zhan, who had already been absent from several important occasions such as the Champion Scholars Banquet and the Spring and Autumn Grand Ritual this year, was either critically ill or had encountered significant political issues. If the latter were true, then it was very likely that he had already lost control of the imperial court. The three princes should have been displaying their skills and competing to become crown prince. Yet their competition had potentially transformed into one for the emperor's throne. Thus, it was only natural that things would become brutal and bloody. The Yao clan could have indeed remained a neutral force and maintained its power and influence over the border regions if Yao Zhan's daughter hadn't married into a wealthy clan in the capital, causing the Yao clan to become tied to the Ministry of Personnel's head minister because of Li Xiling, Yao Zhan's son-in-law. If this weren't the case, the Yao clan could have stayed put and waited for the strange and bloody chaos in the capital to pass. When everything was over, the Yao clan could dispatch a direct descendant to the capital to meet the new emperor and express their loyalty. Alternatively, they could do nothing and wait for the new emperor to tour the south, during which he would try to win over the Yao clan. Standing outside the inn, Third Prince Lu Mao wasn't targeting Qian Pingyan with his words. Instead, he was purposely saying them to Jianyang and the hunchback third grandpa. Things would become very interesting in the inn if they were persuaded by his words. Qian Pingyan was risking his life to protect the Yao clan. So what would happen if the Yao clan ignored his goodwill, and even turned around to scold him for turning them into traitors? After stepping forward in a righteous manner to protect them, could Qian Pingyan still maintain his composure and vigor? Those with a gallant heart could often endure the punishment of blades and flames, and promises between like-minded people in the cultivation world were worth their weight in gold, not being broken even in the face of death. However, neither of these things could endure betrayal. Lu Mao chuckled coldly and continued. Perhaps you're forcing the Yao clan to rebel? You only look at the short term but don't consider the long term or the bigger picture when dealing with gratitude and revenge. So can you truly be regarded as a gallant hero of the cultivation world? Sure enough, the human heart was the weakest against scrutiny and temptation. People were always, even when trapped in a perilous situation, people would still hold on to that faint sliver of hope before their fate was comprehensively sealed. Clan leader Yao Zhan had faced a sinister assassination attempt, yet he had ultimately managed to break free with only some injuries. Moreover, when head minister Li from the Ministry of Personnel had tried to resign back then, the emperor had offered a humorous reply to his resignation letter, writing, "Your freshness is but half gone. It's too early for you to resign." Afterward, the emperor had ordered someone to deliver a few tribute fish to the Li clan's residents. The combat power of the Yao clan's cavalry was still unrivaled among the numerous armies in the south. No one dared to underestimate them. After joining forces with the imperial court and infiltrating northern Jin nation for a mission, the Qi refiners who accompanied the Yao clan's cavalry had most likely returned to clan leader Yao Zhan's side already. It was also rumored that Li Xiling, the Yao clan's impressive son-in-law, had a chance to enter Great Subduing Academy, a Confucian academy located in the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent. Both the Yao clan and the Li clan were pillar forces of the empire. They were upright and noble clans, so the commoners didn't suspect them of trying to incite an uprising even though they were now related through marriage. Quite the contrary, in fact, and the commoners viewed the couple as a match made in heaven. They were like a blooming flower, an extra touch on the Great Quan Empire's formidable power. They were the subject of a beautiful story praised by many people. That being the case, how could the Yao clan lie down and accept its destruction just? Jianyang's expression changed slightly. A cloudy expression spread across the hunchback third grandpa's face. Standing on the second floor, a hint of involuntary resentment was visible on Yao Lingji's beautiful face as she looked at the young boy in white. She felt sincere gratitude toward him, yet she couldn't help but feel annoyed at his actions at the same time. She wasn't feeling this way because of her cowardly desire to live. Rather, this was due to the dense layers of spirit tablets resting inside the ancestral hall of the Yao clan. More would be added each year, and each spirit tablet would contain a name beginning with Yao. Apart from granting their descendants the courage to fight to the death on the battlefield, the spirit tablets of these predecessors who had sacrificed themselves in battle also left behind an intangible pressure. The descendants of the Yao clan couldn't sully the loyalty of the Yao clan. Not even a single bit. They wouldn't accept any blemish. This was human nature. Members of the Yao clan could die, but the reputation of the Yao clan couldn't be sullied. Otherwise, would they have the face to look at their ancestors after death? This was tragic yet respectable. Chen Ping'an ignored both of Third Prince Lu Mao's remarks. Lu Mao opened his mouth for the third time, saying, "Since it doesn't look like you'll change your mind, how about you let the uninvolved people out of the inn first? These young men are all descendants of wealthy clans in my great Quan Empire, yet none of them are lazing around and leisurely enjoying the fortune brought about by their ancestral blessing. Instead, they put themselves in mortal danger and even infiltrate enemy nations to kill our enemies. They're the least deserving of death in a place." He was employing reason, emotion, and the morality of the cultivation world. The 2 tables of young subordinates in the inn were all filled with indignation. They glared at Chen Ping'an in fury, and this was especially the case for the 3 people who had sat at the same table as Gao Shuyi. They were seething with anger, and they felt a strong desire to hack Chen Ping'an's head off. That way they could carry his head to Gao Shuyi's grave in the future, forcing him to apologize for his actions. Wei Xian turned around to look at Chen Ping'an, waiting for an answer. Were they going to release these people or were they going to kill them? Don't allow a single person to leave. However, don't target them either unless they attempt to leave, Chen Ping'an instructed. Wei Xian nodded with a smile. The eunuch in bright red official garb was the only person who could still make his own decisions even in the presence of Third Prince Lu Mao. With his uniquely effeminate voice as a eunuch, he said coldly, "They're nothing more than a bunch of impudent fools, Your Highness. Please allow this old servant in General Su to step forward and capture these criminals from northern Jin Nation. So what if he's a sword cultivator? Will trash become more powerful simply because they possess 1 or 2 flying swords?" Zhonyang was just about to say something, yet the impoverished scholar with the surname Zhong had already cut in front of her and consoled, "Zhonyang, things have already come to this, so the matter already can't get any worse. Why don't we stay put and see how things turn out? You can't change the current situation no matter what you say." The lame young boy standing near the curtain to the kitchen nodded earnestly and concurred. He has uttered nothing but bullshit in his life, and this is his only statement that has a modicum of sense. The hunchbacked old man turned around and fumed. "You're already a cripple, yet you want to become mute as well?" The lame young boy immediately shut up in fright, including Chen Ping'an. All of the 5 people helping the Yao clan were pure martial artists skilled at close-quarter combat. Meanwhile, with the exception of General Su Qingzhou, both of their opponents in the eunuch and Su Tong were qi refiners. In addition to them, there were also the 2 tables of young subordinates who could only sit still in trepidation. On the second floor, Yao Lingji suddenly turned to Chen Ping'an and shouted, "Don't kill anyone else, or else the Yao clan will be dragged to death by you." A door on the second floor suddenly opened and Pei Qian glowered at the young girl and fumed. "Shut your stinky mouth, you stinky little girl. I'll use the peerless sword technique that my dad taught me to stab you to death, if you dare to criticize my dad again." The skinny little girl then looked down at the first floor and asked, "Dad, what should I do now? I've already finished reading the book once." With his back facing the second floor, Chen Ping'an replied, "Then read it again." After pausing for a moment, he added, "If you dare to keep shouting, then you won't be reading books in the future. Rather, you'll be eating books." Pei Qian nodded earnestly and replied, "Got it, Dad. I'll listen to you." The instant that Pei Qian closed her door was the instant that both sides lashed out in unison. From the second floor, Sui Yubian controlled deep infatuation in a crescent-shaped trajectory, slashing at esteemed immortal Su Tong's neck. Su Tong's stable but nimble footwork was dizzying as he dodged the attacks of deep infatuation again and again. At the same time, he held his index finger and middle finger together and summoned abundant spiritual energy to gather to his sleeves, causing 5-colored cloud patterns and lingering mist to materialize on his Dao robe. Numerous warriors clad in black armor appeared beside him. In fact, these warriors were nothing but empty armors, yet they were still surprisingly agile. Deep infatuation could easily pierce through these suits of black armor, Yet doing so was seemingly unable to decrease the combat power of these warriors formed from talismans. Deep infatuation pierced through one of the warriors' face. Yet the warrior surprisingly raised its hands and tightly wrapped it around the blade, leading to a sharp metallic sound as sparks flew through the air. General Su Qingzhou, wearing a militarian armor pellet, and Liu Baixiang wielding halting snow, both stepped forward at the same time, crossing their blades and instantly swapping positions. It was as if a silver thread were flowing from the tips of their blades. Meanwhile, the Qi refiner standing outside the inn used 7 or 8 immortal tools to launch a flurry of attacks at Wei Xian, who was blocking the doorway. These dazzling attacks were extremely spectacular against the backdrop of night. Wei Xian immediately tightened his grip on the divine dew-bearing armor and funneled his true qi into it, causing the armor pellet to instantly transform into a suit of armor on his body. This was identical to what the Great Quan Empire's General Su Qingzhou had done. His fists were as mighty as dragons and as quick as lightning. Wei Xian's fist aura was condensed and rapidly flowing like a waterfall, and he was also being protected by a high-grade suit of dew armor. However, Wei Xian didn't choose to face the attacks from the immortals head-on, and he instead chose to deflect their attacks to the side. Countless streaks of light lingered in the air between the immortal tools and Wei Xian, ringing with crisp metallic sounds as they crisscrossed and attacked the man blocking the entrance. A moment later, Wei Xian was completely enveloped by the dazzling light. However, he became increasingly courageous as he fought, with his aura also rising explosively. Inside the inn, the female sword immortal from the Lotus Flower Blessed Land had an apathetic expression, as she held 2 fingers in front of her chest and controlled deep infatuation to attack Su Tong. She gently twirled the wrist of her other jade-like hand, causing half of the chopsticks on the table to hover into the air as if they were receiving a military command. They transformed into flying swords that streaked through the air, navigating past the black-clad warriors as they shot toward Su Tong. Meanwhile, the other half of the chopsticks flew to the second floor and hovered around Sui Yubian, defending her from the elusive lightning attacks launched by Su Tong. Each exchange would cause a chopstick to disintegrate into dust. Martial arts maniac Zhu Lian remained squatting on the railing, silent and stealthy. In his eyes, Chen Ping'an and the eunuch in bright red official garb were the only people who could decide the outcome of this battle. The two of them were in tacit understanding, and they instantly unleashed their full strength right from the very beginning. Chen Ping'an used a land-shortening talisman, and immediately launched a punch using the deity drumming technique. Meanwhile, the Imperial Guardian of the Great Quan Empire released both his Yin soul and his Yang soul at once, with his 2 Dao manifestations appearing ethereal and intangible yet mighty and dignified. Not only was Chen Ping'an's attack blocked, but his chest was struck by the eunuch's Yin soul as well. Fortunately, golden sweet wine was able to prevent this from causing any serious damage. Even so, excruciating pain still shot through Chen Ping'an's chest. However, Chen Ping'an remained unmoving like a mountain and stomped his foot. He also released his souls, and 2 more Chen Ping'ans appeared on the first floor of the inn. His 2 souls charged forward and unleashed the deity drumming technique. One punch was followed by countless other punches. The essence of the deity drumming technique was its ability to link the astral energy between separate punches. This was a profound and destined regulation like the rising sun and moon and the cycle of life and death. After advancing to the 5th tier and experiencing the battle in Bull Mountain, Chen Ping'an could already release his soul and split it into 3. However, it was a shame that he could only maintain this state for a few seconds. Regardless, combined with his very unreasonable deity drumming technique, just throwing 1 punch was enough. That would provide him with more than enough help. Chen Ping'an's fist struck the old eunuch, and it was as if a war drum had been beaten on the battlefield. More than 10 punches rained down on the eunuch in an instant, each striking flesh and releasing a dull thud. Chen Ping'an's 2 souls returned to his body. He wasn't a legitimate qi refiner after all, so having his soul leave his body for too long would cause him fundamental injuries. On the other hand, Zhonyang, Yao Lingji, and the others from the inn were stunned when they saw the eunuch in bright red official garb attack. Apart from being astounded by his lofty cultivation base, they were also shocked at his ability to release his Yin soul and Yang soul at the same time. He was clearly an earth immortal. In reality, these members of the Yao clan found this inconceivable, because they had always been told that the imperial guardian of the Great Quan Empire was a martial arts superior grandmaster. Now, however, he had somehow transformed into an immortal from the mountains who cultivated Tao and sought longevity. However, this eunuch responsible for overlooking the imperial horses and reviewing and stamping imperial edicts had miscalculated one thing. He hadn't imagined that Qian Ping'an's immortal robe would be such a high-grade robe that was surprisingly capable of blocking attacks from his own soul. Several superior grandmasters in the Great Quan Empire had been killed by this attack, where the eunuch's own soul would reach out and scoop away their hearts. This wasn't as bloody as it sounded. His attack would simply cause one's heart to dry and crack, instantly severing its connections with one's acupoints and meridians. After death, the victims would shrivel like rotten wood. In a sense, it was similar to shattering one's bridge of immortality. Thus, the eunuch was extremely skilled at both close-quarter combat and using immortal treasures and mystical abilities to fight from long range. Because of this, he wasn't afraid of others rushing over to fight him or fighting him from a distance. However, the eunuch quickly noticed something amiss after being struck by Qian Ping'an's second punch. It wasn't that Qian Ping'an's fist aura was extremely powerful, but rather that he should have been able to dodge this attack with ease. The eunuch came to a realization after being struck by Qian Ping'an's fifth punch. He was able to roughly understand the patterns and principles behind his enemy's attacks. After being struck by the 10th punch, the eunuch seemingly abandoned all thoughts of trying to dodge these attacks. He didn't shirk or retreat. Instead, he chose to exchange wound for wound. During this time, 1st and 15th set their sights on the eunuch's Yin soul and Yang soul. On one side, there was a eunuch in bright red official garb who looked like a pure martial artist but was actually a chi refiner. On the other side, there was a young boy in white who looked like a sword cultivator but was actually a pure martial artist. Qian Ping'an and the eunuch stood extremely close to each other, with just 1 or 2 arms' length between them as they engaged in an incredibly crude and basic fight. This was especially the case compared to Sui Yubian controlling her sword from the 2nd floor to attack her opponent, Lu Baixiang and Su Qingzhou swinging their sabers and causing flashes of murderous saber light to shimmer through the air, and Wei Xian standing outside the door and engaged in an epic battle as numerous immortal tools and a myriad of peculiar phenomena enveloped him. In comparison, there was nothing special about Qian Ping'an's fight with the eunuch apart from their speed. Their fight was bland yet incredibly deadly. The 2 tables of young subordinates had already run to the stairway to seek shelter, keenly aware that they had absolutely no right to interfere in this chaotic battle taking place in the inn. Only Zhu Lian remained idle, yet he didn't stop the young subordinates from shuffling to the stairway. In fact, he didn't so much as spare them a single glance. Zhong Kuei, the impoverished scholar, leaned on the counter and looked at Qian Ping'an. He had traveled all around the world, yet he had never seen a pure martial artist assume a fist stance and attack in such a smooth and flowing manner before. This boy was still young, so how was he achieving this? He had definitely embarked on many long journeys and witnessed many majestic mountains and great rivers, right? Killing intent, cruelty, and violence. He possessed none of these qualities, and even his will to fight for victory wasn't very strong. However, his aura was somehow still very powerful. The impoverished scholar was slightly curious. What was the fundamental purpose of the young boy's fist technique? However, human strength had its limit, and suffering backlash from his own fist intent was also a destructive way of fighting his opponent. He would wound himself while wounding his enemy. Since this was the case, and if this were the limit of Qian Ping'an's fist technique, then it would be far from enough. Even if he risked suffering severe wounds to eventually kill Li Li, the hugely renowned imperial guardian of the Great Quan Empire, this would still be far from enough. Pure martial artists weren't respected by the world, nor were they respected and feared by the imperial courts. Instead, everyone revered and bowed to those immortal cultivators. There was a very good reason for this. A single sword could shatter a myriad of mystical techniques. This was a popular saying in the mountains, and many people believed that. It was an expression of apprehension toward the destructive ability of sword cultivators. However, this wasn't entirely correct. The term myriad already described the impressive nature of cultivators. Sure enough, Qian Ping'an's final punch using the deity drumming technique shattered Li Li into pieces, with even the eunuch's bright red official garb seemingly transforming into something elusive and intangible. However, Qian Ping'an immediately knew that he was in danger when he noticed the complete lack of blood. He immediately channeled the deity suppression technique from the proper sword scripture, using his fists instead of his sword to assume a defensive stance. He retreated once and once again. Thankfully, First had already appeared in front of him after shooting forward and mysteriously piercing nothing but thin air. Add to that his Dao robe, golden sweet wine, and Qian Ping'an could most likely take this opportunity to replenish his breath of true qi. Majestic World wasn't the lotus flower-blessed land, and both qi refiners and martial artists here would pay close attention to their martial artist opponents and capitalize on the moment that they replenished their breath of true qi. Eunuch Li had avoided Qian Ping'an's powerful final punch, similar to how the formation cultivator outside the Flying Eagle Fortress had used a talisman to swap positions with his disciples. Both of their techniques worked in similar ways, and it was just that Li had sacrificed his young soul instead of a disciple. Eunuch Li was standing where his young soul had battled against first just then, and Qian Ping'an was already nearing the limit of his power after unleashing the deity drumming technique without holding back. Moreover, the destruction of Li's young soul only caused his incomplete golden core to lose a tiny bit of its luster. Once again, Li's yin soul reached forward with its hook-like fingers to grab Qian Ping'an's heart. However, it was as if his hand had smashed into extremely tough rice paper, as golden sweet wine protected Qian Ping'an's soul from being shattered and dispersed by this attack. The Dao robe protected the young boy's heart, yet it was also unable to do anything else because of this. At the same time, First also became trapped inside the yin soul's body after trying to block it. It was as if the flying sword were stuck in mud. Li had already appeared beside Qian Ping'an, and he immediately launched a palm strike to shatter the deity suppression technique's fist intent. He then stepped forward and used two fingers to stab at Qian Ping'an's temple. Qian Ping'an slid horizontally away. Li wasn't powerful simply because he was a pseudo-earth immortal on the cusp of advancing to the golden core tier, but also because he possessed both offensive and defensive prowess without relying on external tools. As for whether Li possessed any immortal treasures and trump cards, this was very difficult to say. Eunuch Li didn't seize the opportunity to push forward. Instead, he stood still and clenched his palm, which he had used to shatter the deity suppression technique's fist intent, into a fist. He then rapidly unclenched his fist, revealing the squirming ridges on his palm as well as the threads of bright red. It was as if the ridges on his palm had transformed into a vermilion talisman. After striking Qian Ping'an's temple with his two fingers, Eunuch Li drew his fingers across his palm and said in his mind, "Talisman, activate." Qian Ping'an was just about to replenish his breath of true qi, yet he suddenly felt like a large mountain was bearing down and suppressing him. Many talismans glowing with spiritual light materialized on golden sweet wine's sleeves and shoulders. Blood poured from Qian Ping'an's temple. "I can also throw a punch, and you can regard this as a welcome present from the Great Quan Empire," Li said with a faint smile. The eunuch in bright red official garb walked forward, with his large sleeves billowing as he spoke. During this time he also cocked his head to the side to dodge first, which was piercing toward the back of his head. He used his fingers to pinch the flying sword, and he gently tossed it away and coincidentally struck 15th hovering nearby. He arrived in front of Qian Ping'an with a single stride. Li placed his left palm, which contained the vermilion talisman, on Qian Ping'an's chest in a seemingly casual manner. Then he threw a punch with his right hand, striking the back of his own hand. It was as if a strong and heavy nail had been brutally hammered into golden sweet wine. Qian Ping'an retreated several steps. Li followed him like a shadow, once again using his right fist to strike his left hand. Qian Ping'an's Dao robe shuddered violently, with the spiritual energy and martial arts astral energy in its sleeves crumbling at the same time. Qian Ping'an retreated again and again. Li didn't pursue Qian Ping'an this time, but simply raised his hand and grabbed the golden robe that had suddenly materialized around his neck. He tugged the golden rope forcefully, causing it to leave a bloody gash on his neck. However, Li paid no heed to this wound as he allowed the golden rope, most likely a demon-binding chain, to wrap around his wrist. The sleeve of his bright red official garb was already in tatters, and there was also a dark green imprint left around his arm. Eunuch Li clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, You sure have a lot of treasures on you. This is another immortal treasure, isn't it? However, it's a shame that you're neither a sword cultivator nor a chi refiner, so your mastery over these immortal treasures is indeed quite poor. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to deliver my third punch so soon. As it turned out, Li Li's left hand with the vermilion talisman had already clenched back into a fist, after the golden demon binding chain wrapped around his right hand. He simply pointed at Qian Pingan's forehead from a distance, and it was as if Qian Pingan's glabella had suffered a heavy blow, with his skin cracking and blood trickling down his face. Qian Pingan's head jerked backward, yet he forcefully stomped on the ground as he retreated to prevent himself from falling backward. A dark look flashed across the depths of Li Li's eyes. 1st and 15th were flying around behind him and doing battle with his own soul. Li Li chuckled coldly and mused. These two little swords are just as loyal as the Yao clan. However, it's a shame that they don't appear to be bonded to you, resulting in their power decreasing drastically. Perhaps I can take them for myself if I erase their sentience and spirituality. This is truly an unexpected surprise. The Een soul surprisingly grew 3 heads and 6 arms in an instant, with each of its heads having a different appearance. They no longer looked like Li Li, but rather like 3 deities honored in the martial sage temples of the Great Quan Empire. There was a strong-looking man with a large beard, an elegant-looking Confucian warrior, and an expressionless old man. The 3 pairs of arms held a pair of truncheons, a pair of axes and a spear, all of which were formed from incense smoke. Even though Li Li turned some of his attention to the clash between his Een soul and the 2 flying swords, this didn't hinder him from maintaining his guard against Qian Pingan. Even though he hadn't gained the initial advantage, the imperial guardian of the Great Quan Empire, renowned throughout all of the nations in the central region of Parasol Leaf Continent, eventually managed to steady the situation and gain the upper hand. However, Li Li hadn't anticipated Qian Pingan's response. The young boy had been struck by so many punches, with blood still continuing to flow from his temple, yet he was acting as if he weren't injured at all. Qian Pingan's injuries were grave, but his energy and spirit, which was even more mystical than his fist intent, didn't plummet as a result. Instead, they were continuing to rise. However, this didn't matter. Li Li could still take things slowly and eventually exhaust the young boy. Even if Qian Pingan threw those chaotic punches again, Li Li would at most lose his Een soul for a while. On the other hand, Qian Pingan's body and soul definitely wouldn't be able to withstand this punishment. It wasn't that Li Li didn't want to finish the battle as quickly as possible, but rather that he was unable to settle the battle with a single powerful attack. If his opponent were an ordinary martial artist at the 7th tier or an ordinary chi refiner at the 8th tier, then he could have killed them twice already. Elsewhere, Liu Baixiang was at a disadvantage as he fought against General Su Qingzhou. Firstly, Liu Baixiang had only just walked out of his picture scroll, unlike Wei Xian. As a result, he was still unfamiliar with the abundant spiritual energy in Majestic World. Secondly, Su Qingzhou was wearing a suit of golden crow armor, so Liu Baixiang would likely have been completely suppressed if it weren't for halting snow. This saber was a relic left behind by a deceased nascent tier earth immortal from Peace and Tranquility Mountain. There were deep saber wounds on Liu Baixiang's chest and shoulders, so deep that even his bones could be seen. However, the founder of the demonic forces in the Lotus Flower Blessed Land remained calm and composed. It was as if he were far more interested in the saber techniques of General Su Qingzhou from the Great Quan Empire rather than defeating this person and achieving victory. Sui Yubian was fighting against Flora Convent's Su Tong, and even though she was a martial artist, the battle between them appeared more like a battle between 2 chi refiners. However, Su Tong was clearly treating Sui Yubian as just a sword expert. Even though Sui Yubian was a tricky opponent, she wouldn't prove too troublesome as long as she wasn't a sword cultivator who could nurture bonded flying swords. Meanwhile, Wei Xian was enjoying a hearty battle outside the inn. He was filled with vigorous astral energy, and with the dew armor that Qian Pingan had given him, he barely felt a tickle from the few attacks that leaked through his defenses. In fact, all of them were paying attention to the battle between Qian Pingan and eunuch Li Li as they fought. Sui Yubian was the first to speak, asking, "Young master." The injury-riddled Qian Pingan could only remain silent and shake his head. He could only hold on to his breath of true qi, not daring to replenish it. "What, is that all you've got?" Li Li asked with a smile. If it weren't for golden sweet wine, the smell of Chun Pingin's blood would have already suffused throughout the entire inn. Li Li viciously smashed the vermilion talisman on his palm into Chun Pingin's chest, and golden sweet wine was only able to block a bit more than half of the talisman's power. The remaining power of the talisman seeped into Chun Pingin's chest. It was as if his heart were being carved out. The cold sweat on his forehead mixed together with the blood on his face, flowing down his cheeks and eventually pitter-pattering to the floor. Li Li's killing intent became even stronger. He was waiting for Chun Pingin to become genuinely exhausted. The young boy could rely on his grit and determination to forcefully suppress the agonizing pain of his wounds. So Li Li's opportunity would only come when Chun Pingin's breath of true qi finally started to weaken and disperse. He could afford to wait, but Chun Pingin couldn't afford to wait. Due to these reasons, Li Li didn't try to push his advantage or take any risks. He simply continued to engage in close-quarter combat with Chun Pingin. In any case, releasing his Yin soul and Yang soul at once was no relaxing task. If it weren't for Li Li's pseudo-golden core allowing his abundance of spiritual energy to far surpass those at the same cultivation base, then there was simply no way that his Yin soul could have maintained its three-headed and six-armed martial sage form for so long and even fought against 1st and 15th. It would have dissipated long ago and automatically returned to Li Li's physical body. Li Li glanced at the old man squatting on the second-floor railings out of the corners of his eyes. He couldn't help but feel slightly puzzled. Why was this person idly squatting there and observing the battles the entire time? Seizing the fleeting opportunity when Li Li glanced at martial arts maniac Zhu Lian, Chun Pingin started to forcefully replenish his breath of true qi. Li Li chuckled coldly in his mind. Putting up a last-ditch struggle? You're going to lose this gamble. His Yin soul charged over in a flash, arriving before Chun Pingin and chaotically swinging its 6 arms and 5 weapons at the young boy's head. Meanwhile, Li Li personally dealt with the 2 flying swords. Countless streams of snow-white spiritual energy spilled out from his bright red official garb, transforming into something akin to a large spider web, as it comprehensively blocked 1st and 15th from rushing over to rescue their owner. Even though these streams of snow-white spiritual energy were unable to trap the 2 flying swords, delaying them for a brief moment already gave Li Li enough time to stride over and arrive near them. He snapped his fingers and flicked his sleeve, striking one of the 2 flying swords with each motion. Eunuch Li Li found the current situation slightly laughable. His young opponent was truly seeking death. As it turned out, he wasn't replenishing his breath of true qi at all. Instead, he had only feigned doing so in order to trick him over. However, what was the purpose? His reckless decision to step forward and defend the Yao clan served no purpose, and his current attempt to play a small trick also served no purpose. This young boy was most likely a lofty individual from a large and wealthy clan, and the many powerful subordinates accompanying him had probably allowed him to enjoy a peaceful and smooth-sailing life so far. Thus, he was oblivious to the profoundness of heaven and earth. Since Li Li had already become enemies with this person who definitely possessed an astonishing background, it only made sense that he should kill him to avoid more troubles in the future. Otherwise, the entire Great Quan Empire might face a huge challenge in the future if Li Li allowed this tiger to return to its den. Compared to the previous exchanges where Chun Pingin and Li Li had swapped punches with each other, Chun Pingin's battle against the Yin god appeared even more dangerous and startling. Fortunately, Chun Pingin was no stranger to this kind of battle. After all, had he not experienced a similar earth-shaking battle when fighting against Ding Ying's Golden Dao manifestation in Bull Mountain? At that time, Chun Pingin had only been able to defend but not counterattack. In the end, Bull Mountain had been ruthlessly shattered and destroyed by Ding Ying's Golden Dao manifestation. And now, Chun Pingin was exchanging blows with this measly Yin soul, with neither side willing to dodge or retreat.